Chapter 445. Yang Fan did not rush to the nunnery to find Anu after seeing her yesterday, because he wanted to solve the King Liang's assassination case first. Otherwise, if Tang Zong and a group of Luoyang government servants followed him all day, it would affect his plan of chasing after Anu. After figuring out how to solve the King Liang's assassination case, Yang Fan also thought about how to change Anu's mind. After thinking about it, Yang Fan felt that he could only use the method that was overused by the ancients. A virtuous woman is afraid of being pestered by a man. It was an old saying passed down by the ancients for thousands of years, so there must be a reason for its existence. Therefore, after seeing Anu today, the series of seemingly joking words that Yang Fan said were all painstakingly thought out. Seeing that Anu was angry and laughing at the same time, Yang Fan knew that Anu's guard had been somewhat loosened. He was about to strike while the iron was hot when Ding Ding suddenly led a large group of old nuns, middle nuns, and young nuns to find them. A group of nuns surrounded Yang Fan. Ding Ting Shirtai put her palms together and said, "Since you have the decree of the national protector, naturally you are a Buddhist monk. I wonder what is the purpose of your visit to our nunnery." Tin Ano hurriedly bowed to Ding 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 and said, "Disciple greets master." Ding 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 nodded and looked at Yang Fan in a dignified manner. Yang Fan calmly said, "You are the abbot of this nunnery, right? To tell you the truth, I came with the decree of Master Huai. Although I am a monk, I am not here to audit the affairs of your temple, but to find my wife who ran away from home." Wife who ran away from home. The nuns were in an uproar. Ding 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 was slightly surprised and quickly asked, "Who is your wife?" Yang Fan pointed at Tin Ano and said, "Of course it's her." Tin Ano was angry and anxious and shouted, "I am not. I have nothing to do with him." Yang Fan spread out his hands and said helplessly, "Women always say one thing but mean another. You should understand." Ding Ding and the group of old nuns, middle nuns, and young nuns were all speechless. Yang Fan, shut up. Tin Ano's almond-shaped eyes widened and she was full of anger. Seeing this, Yang Fan hurriedly said to Nun Ding Ding and the others, "I'll tell Nun Ding the details later. Now, can Nun Ding give me some time to settle our family matters? Who has family affairs with you?" She glared at Yang Fan and said, "Fan." Ding Ding glared and Yang Fan. "Yang." She glared at Ding Ding. She glared at Fan. Ding 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 was extremely angry. However, I Don Fan, Monk Ding Fan will Hua, and his Fan, Master Hua Fan, is his Huai. Ding Master is Huanu, however. Since Monk Ding came with Great Master Huai's decree, I believe he is not a bad person. I will leave for the time being. I hope Monk Ding can give this poor nun a satisfactory explanation. Of course, of course, of course. Take care, Master." Yang Fan smiled from ear to ear and nodded his head repeatedly. Just as Nun Ding Ding left with the nuns, Tian Ai Nu's palm blade arrived. Yang Fan tilted his head and dodged her palm strike. He bent his fingers like a claw and grabbed Tian Ai Nu's wrist. Tian Ai Nu used her fingers like a sword and stabbed at Yang Fan's meridian point. The two of them started fighting in the bushes. Ding Ding walked to a distance. When she turned her head and saw this scene, she couldn't help but put her palms together and repeatedly chanted, "Amitba," as soon as Tin Ano and Yang Fan fought. She was surprised to find that Yang Fan's martial arts skill was far above hers. In addition, she didn't want to hurt Yang Fan, so she didn't dare to use many sinister and ruthless moves. Inevitably, her hands and feet were tied. After exchanging dozens of moves, Yang Fan used a small grappling hand to entangle her wrists and firmly captured her. Tin Ano glared at Yang Fan. She said angrily, "What do you want? Don't tell me you want to force me back home?" Yang Fan said, "You were the one who made the first move. Don't blame me, okay? At least calm down and listen to me tell you a story, okay?" Tin Ano's eyes widened. She said in surprise, "Tell a story." Yang Fan nodded solemnly. "That's right, a story." Yang Fan was afraid that she would escape. Still holding her hands, he dragged her to the edge of the pond. The two of them sat down on a rock by the pond. Yang Fan held her hands and suddenly asked, "Do you remember what I told you about me? I told you at that time that I can only tell you what happened after I turned 9. Tin Eno suddenly thought of that day, that night, that sumptuous meal on the table. Under that lonely lamp, he and she, a pair of man and woman in the same boat, each recounting their painful past. Tin Eno's eyes suddenly became somewhat hazy. The strength in her hands also unknowingly dissipated. Yang Fan sensed her reaction and gently let go of her hands. Tin Eno fixed her eyes on Yang Fan. She faintly said, "Could it be that you want to tell me the story before you turn 9? Yang Fan lightly shook his head and said yes and no. Not only the story before I turned 9, but also, from the day we broke up, the story that happened after that. Yang Fan began to narrate to Tin Eno. He first told her about his childhood, which made Tin Eno cry in sadness. He then told her about how after Tin Eno left, Ma Chiao accidentally killed Bao Yining. Wu Guangda was unjustly imprisoned, and Ma Chiao admitted his guilt. He told her about how he robbed the execution ground and was hunted down. So they stole the Taoist robe and were purposely forced by Xue Huai to shave their hair and sneak into White Horse Temple. He continued, for revenge, after he found out that Xue Huai intended to participate in the Shangyuan tournament. He racked his brains to organize the Kuju, Juju, and Sumo tournaments. How he participated in the palace tournament, how he became an imperial guard, and why he approached Shanghai Wanner. Yang Fan spoke in great detail, and Tin Eno listened attentively. In the beginning, she wanted to put on a dismissive look. But who else in this world would have a life that was more tortuous, bizarre, and full of ups and downs than Yang Fan's? Unknowingly, Tin Eno was completely captivated by the story he told. Yang Fan did not hide anything from Anu, including the ambiguous relationship between him and Princess Taiping. He had already discovered that Anu was the one who lacked the most sense of security among all the women he knew. At the same time, she was also the most meticulous and sensitive girl. In this era, there might occasionally be 1 or 2 women who would have the idea of equality between men and women, especially when it came to marriage. But in this era, it was definitely an exception, a weirdo. They tried to challenge the order of this patriarchal society and were destined to have a tragic ending. Based on the environment in which Tin Eno grew up and the education she received, it was impossible for her to have such an idea. When she saw that Yang Fan got married, she was inconsolable and even fled to Buddhism. It was not because he married a wife, but because she felt that she had been abandoned. Although Yang Fan's marriage was arranged by the emperor, unless he left, there was no way he could resist. But she came with a heart full of enthusiasm. Seeing this scene, it was natural that she was struck by lightning. How could she think so much? Therefore, when Yang Fan told her about himself, he did not want to hide anything. Any concealment might cause a greater misunderstanding when she discovered something in the future. Moreover, the relationship between Princess Taiping and him had long been known to everyone. Although Anu was practicing hard in the nunnery, it was not certain that she would not hear these rumors. It did not mean that she would not know in the future. It was better to let her know as early as possible. Yang Fan talked about his and Wan Er's mutual love. He also talked about Princess Taiping's obstruction. He talked about his return from the western region, Princess Taiping's suggestion to the emperor to arrange a marriage, and then he and Xiao Man's recognition as brother and sister. Along with his narration, Anu's mood was sometimes happy and sometimes worried, sometimes sad and sometimes angry. When Yang Fan finished, he looked at Tin Eno and said, "This is everything that happened to me before and after. If you were me, what would you do?" Tin Eno was silent. Yang Fan gently held her hand and said, "I always felt that I already had Wanner in my heart. If I let you follow me, it would be wrong for you. But in the western region, under those circumstances, it was a matter of life and death twice in a row. What could I say? After that, I wanted to say it, but I didn't have the chance. You did everything to me, especially when you came to Luoyang. After I was imprisoned, you risked your life to save me and became a monk for me. Anew, I am not a plant. How can I not be moved? If you don't mind that I already have one, and Xiaoman, let me be a little greedy, okay? No, I don't like you anymore. I have converted to Buddhism. Tin Ano spoke with a straight face, but his tone had obviously softened. Girls were always a little reserved. Previously, she had sought death to become a monk. Now that he said it, she had to obediently go home with him. How embarrassing would that be? Fortunately, although Tin Ano was delicate, Yang Fan was very thick-skinned. He said shamelessly, "But I like you now." Tin Ano said, "You like me, so I have to go with you." "Why?" Yang Fan laughed, "Because I am thick-skinned. Think about it carefully. This is the first time I have taken the initiative to chase after a woman. Why don't you promise me?" Tin Ano turned her head and ignored him. Yang Fan also knew that he couldn't be too hasty. He had to give her some time to recover. Otherwise, how could she leave the mountain gate shyly because she was embarrassed? Now that she was willing to act coquettishly, the matter was half done. Yang Fan pressed her soft palm and asked, "Anu, what happened to you on Mount Hua?" When Tin Ano heard his question, she felt wronged. Suddenly, she thought of how powerful the young master was. She had betrayed the young master because of Yang Fan. It was hard to guarantee that the young master wouldn't pay attention to Yang Fan. If she really went with Yang Fan, it would be troublesome to hide her identity. She couldn't help but feel troubled again. At the princess's mansion, young Master Jiang was sitting upstairs. His thoughts were like a tide. There was no one else upstairs. Young Master Jiang was very clean, so even though he had just arrived, no one dared to disturb him. He remembered the last time he was here. It was also an autumn day. That day, it was raining continuously. Today, it was not raining, but it was still a pool of water with half of the autumn lotus. The only difference was that there was a young girl in green making tea and a handsome young man walking in the corridor beside the pool. At that time, the man walked in the corridor and the young girl passed by him through the window. Now, she was finally like a swallow cutting the water, never to return. Young Master Jiang sighed and suddenly felt like drinking tea. He knocked 3 times on the barrier door and stopped. Young Master Jiang said lightly, "Come in." The barrier door opened and Lu Boyan walked in lightly. He stood still and said softly, "When do you plan to see him?" "This old servant will arrange it." Young Master Jiang said indifferently, "Tomorrow." Lu Boyan frowned slightly. He hesitated and reminded, "Young Master, I am afraid the imperial court will send troops soon." Young Master Jiang didn't answer him. He just sat cross-legged, but he gave off a feeling of tall and straight bamboo. Lu Boyan gave a slight bow and quietly retreated. Young Master Jiang was silent for a while. He slowly raised his head and looked at the heaven in the distance. The giant Buddha in heaven was looking down at Luoyang. He had a tranquil expression, just like young Master Jiang at this moment. The setting sun shone on the face of the giant Buddha. The golden light shone brilliantly, but the giant Buddha bathed in the twilight gave people a feeling that he was past his prime. Young Master Jiang smiled and said to himself, "If the general trend cannot be reversed, what is the use of pushing the boat with the current?" Chapter 446. In the morning mist, Yang Fan and Xiaomeng came out of the back garden in martial attire. Both of them were martial artists. Other than those passionate days when they had just consummated their marriage, they had resumed their habit of waking up early to practice. Naturally, the two of them didn't practice separately. They would spar from time to time, which was a great help to both of their martial arts progress. Back in the central room in front of the bedroom, Tao Mei and third sister had already prepared water and toiletries. The two of them washed up and got ready for breakfast. Xiao Meng said while washing her face, "Lang Jun, do you want me to go to the tranquil sect today? No matter what, I've fought alongside her, and we have a relationship. Besides, we're both women, and some things are easier to talk about. Yang Fan was brushing his teeth. He tilted his head and thought for a moment. He opened his mouth full of foam and said, "Forget it. She hasn't left, so there's hope. Nu is the most meticulous. If I let you do it, she might think that I don't care about her. There's no rush, let me do it." Xiao Meng said, "Oh, then I'll go to the store today." Yang Fan said, "Okay, do what you need to do, but don't overwork yourself. Don't tire yourself out." Speaking of this, Yang Fan secretly smiled and said to Xiao Meng mysteriously, "If you want to fight alongside Nu, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future." Xiao Meng rolled her eyes at him and said coquettishly, "Ba ba ba! Jinx, is it fun to save you from prison? And in the future, huh?" Seeing Yang Fan's naughty smile, Xiao Meng knew something was wrong. Her big eyes turned slightly on her face, covered in water droplets. She suddenly understood and couldn't help but be shy and embarrassed. She raised her hand and a string of water droplets sprayed at Yang Fan. She said coquettishly, "Bad thing in your dreams." Yang Fan laughed out loud and jumped to avoid the water she splashed at him. In the courtyard, Tao Mei and third sister, who were sweeping the leaves, couldn't help but smile when they saw the quarrel between the master and the mistress. Speaking of which, the master and mistress of his house were really very sweet. The two of them had been servants in other people's homes before. Of course, there were newlyweds in those big families. But how could there be a couple who loved each other so much, not to mention observing etiquette every day? Even though they were husband and wife, sleeping on the same bed, they were still very respectful to each other, making it even more awkward than when they met a guest. It was said that this was called raising the table to meet eyebrows, the way of husband and wife. Tao Mei and third sister didn't understand. They only knew that they were truly in love like Yang Fan and Xiao Man. Only then would they be truly happy every day. The two little girls were not considered young in this era. They hoped that their future husband would also be a man like him. He did not need to be as high an official as him, nor did he need to be as handsome as him. He only needed to be as good to his wife as he was to her. The two little girls had already reached the age of yearning for love. The breakfast of the Yang family had always been relatively simple. Of course, this simplicity was also based on the standard of a big family. The husband and wife were still young and practiced martial arts, so they ate more than ordinary people. So the breakfast was still very sumptuous. The two of them sat down behind the table. Yang Fan first filled a bowl of meat porridge for Xiao Man and placed it in front of her. Xiao Man smiled sweetly at her Langjun. Just as she picked up the chopsticks, she suddenly smelled a strong smell of meat in the porridge, and her stomach suddenly turned. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Yang Fan put down the chopsticks and chased after Xiao Man, who ran out of the door. He nervously stroked her back. Xiao Man leaned against the osmanthus tree and vomited for a long time, but she didn't vomit anything. She waved her hand to her husband and said nothing. "It's probably because I was practicing martial arts this morning, and I suddenly felt a little nauseous when I smelled the smell of meat." Yang Fan let out a sigh of relief and gently stroked her back. He said, "That's true. It's getting colder. My wife, don't wear so thin when you wake up in the morning. Just do some simple exercises every day and don't practice so hard. There won't be a chance for my wife to practice martial arts in the future." After a while, the churning in Xiao Man's stomach gradually calmed down, and the two of them returned to the room. Yang Fan asked the servants to remove all the meat porridge and other food from Xiao Man's table, and replaced it with plain porridge and a few light side dishes. As the two of them ate, Yang Fan said, "Don't go to the shop today. Our shop is managed and arranged by my wife. The shopkeeper and the shop assistants all have their own duties, and everything is in order. There's no need for my wife to go there. If you're worried, you can check the accounts every half a month." Xiao Man made a face at him and said, "It's just occasionally uncomfortable. Look at how nervous you are. Don't worry, I'm just going to sit and watch. I'm not going to do anything. It's boring to stay at home for too long, so I'm just going out to relax. Yang Fan shook his head and said, You just don't know how to enjoy the good fortune. The couple bickered as they finished their breakfast and rinsed their mouths with salt water. Xiaoman then helped Yang Fan change into his formal attire. Seeing that Yang Fan was wearing a hat and belt early in the morning, Xiaoman couldn't help but ask, Are you not going to the tranquil sect, Lang Jun? Yang Fan scratched her nose and said, Once I'm sure she's there, I'll just visit from time to time. How can I go there early in the morning? I've been neglecting the Yaman's affairs these days. It's confusing to do this in the beginning. I don't know what I'm up to, but I can't pretend to be profound for too long. I'm going to the Yamen to take a look first. As the two were talking, the doorman, Mo Xuanfei, suddenly ran over. The people from the front residence were not allowed to enter the backyard, and everyone in the residence knew this rule. But no one knew what urgent matter he had. So third sister didn't stop him. Mo Xuanfei ran to Yang Fan, who was about to leave, and said while panting, Lang, a high-ranking official is here to visit. Yang Fan was startled and asked curiously, Who's visiting so early in the morning? Mo Xuanfei presented a greeting card and said, Lang, look, he claims to be a friend of Lang. He said something about the general of the right guard and something about the Khan. I don't understand, but I know it should be a very, very high-ranking official. When Yang Fan heard the general of the right guard, he couldn't help but be startled. He thought that the general of the right guard, Wu Yuji, had come to visit again. He hadn't had any contact with his princess, wife these days. When he heard Mo Xuanfei say something about the Khan, his heart couldn't help but be moved. He quickly grabbed the greeting card and opened it to have a look. Xiaoman asked, Lang Jun, who is this person? Yang Fan's expression was a bit strange. He said it's Ashina Huzalo. Now he has been conferred the title of Khan by the court and is also the general of the right guard. Of course, this general of the right guard is just a title. The real power is still in Wu Yuji's hands. Xiaoman said, This General Huzalo's rank is higher than Longjuan's by more than 1 or 2 ranks. For him to lower himself to pay a visit, what does he want? Yang Fan shook his head. I'm not sure. I'll personally go and welcome him. Yang Fan and Ashina Huzalo had first met through bow striking. At the time he had been a lowly guard, but when Huzalo had personally invited him to a banquet to celebrate his victory, the two of them had become friends. Later on, when the Western Turkic tribes were jointly oppressed by the Tibetans and the Eastern Turks, their territory gradually shrank. With no other choice, Ashina Huzalo could only follow the advice of the tribal leaders and hand over the elite forces to his subordinate, Mohedegan, official name. This Mohedegan was also the leader of the strongest Turkic tribe, the Turkishi tribe, and his name was Wuzheil. Ashina Huzalo brought nearly 100,000 women, children, and elders to the east, and the imperial court made arrangements. The settlement of more than 100,000 people was an extremely complicated matter. Pasture or plowing had to be arranged, they had to have a livelihood, and they had to be helped to build residences. As tribal chief, Ashina Huzalo had naturally stayed behind to take care of everything. It was only recently that he had come to Luoyang. Yang Fan had already heard that he had returned to Luoyang. When Wu Sanxi had led the chiefs of the 4 barbarians to request permission from Wu Zetian to build the bronze Dubhe, Ashina Huzalo had been one of the tribe leaders who had been one of the leaders. But he had not sought out Yang Fan, and Yang Fan had not gone to see him, as Yang Fan felt somewhat ashamed. Ashina Huzalo's subordinate, Wuzheil, had been supported by Shin Mu with the intention of replacing Huzalo. Yang Fan had learned of this plan during his last trip to the western regions at Big Dipper Valley, and after seeing the support of the western Turkic tribes for Wuzheil, Yang Fan knew that if Huzalo tried to return to the western regions, it would be a tragedy for him. The result would either be that the Western Turks would completely fracture and become a ball of loose sand, losing the ability to restrain the Eastern Turks in Tubo and being swallowed up, or that the deserted Huzalo would be killed by his own subordinates, and the Ashaina clan would be completely erased from the western Turkic tribes. Thus, while Yang Fan had agreed to Shinmu's plan, he still viewed Huzalo as a friend, and this was tantamount to betraying Huzalo. How could Yang Fan have the face to meet him again? But now that Huzalo had come of his own accord, Yang Fan could not close the door and refuse to see him. Yang Fan hurriedly welcomed Huzalo and invited him into his study. After exchanging some pleasantries, he asked about the purpose of his visit. Huzalo had not been very old, but he now looked rather haggard, completely lacking the high-spirited spirit he had when they first met. There was a faint air of decadence about him. Huzalo softly sighed and said to Yang Fan, "Erlang, I came today for no other reason than Erlang is Teacher Shue's disciple. I heard that Teacher Shue has always been close to Erlang and listens to his every word." Yang Fan slightly creased his brow in surprise. "Brother Luo, why are you suddenly bringing this up? Could it be that the great general has come into some sort of conflict with Teacher Shue? Don't worry, this little brother will host a banquet and invite Master to make peace with Brother Luo. If it's not too intense of a conflict." Huzalo waved his hand and bitterly smiled. "Erlang misunderstands. This means that the imperial court is preparing to send troops. Do you not know?" Startled, Yang Fan curiously asked, "Who are they sending troops to?" A thought suddenly occurred to him. Could it be that the emperor has decided to send troops to the 4 garrisons of Anchi? Huzalo replied, "It seems that Erlang really does not know. Yes, this is an important military matter that cannot be discussed in the imperial court. Before the decision to send troops is formally made, it cannot be announced to the world. Erlang is currently a civil official and an official of the Bureau of Punishments. He has not participated in this plan, so he naturally does not know." Not only did Huzalo's spirit seem old, but he also liked to talk a lot. After rambling on and on, he took in a deep breath and said, "The Eastern Turkic Khaganate Mosh has invaded Spiritual Province." Chapter 447. Mok invaded the spiritual state. Yang Fan thought for a while and asked curiously, "What does Mok's invasion of the spiritual state have to do with Brother Luo and Master Shue?" Before Yang Fan could finish a sentence, he remembered that the imperial court appointed Shue Huai as the commander-in-chief and Prime Minister Li Zhaoda as the vice-commander-in-chief during the last Mok invasion. Did the imperial court send Shue Huai this time? At this thought, Yang Fan couldn't help but frown. Seeing his frown, Huzalo nodded and said, "Yes. This time Her Majesty still wants Master Shue to be the commander-in-chief." Yang Fan was rather dissatisfied with the Empress's plan. In order to ascend to the throne, she had brutally slaughtered members of Li Tang's royal family. It could be said that anyone who didn't have the qualifications to become an empress but wanted to do so. She supported ruthless officials with the intention of attacking her political enemies who stood in the way of her ascension to the throne. However, after she ascended to the throne, she stayed in the imperial palace and was deceived by the ruthless officials, creating a series of unjust, false, and wrong cases. As a result, the imperial court became unstable, which could be explained by the fact that the people didn't approve of her ascension to the throne as a woman, which was why she was overly cautious and panicked. However, what other reason could there be for her to treat military affairs like child's play? Who didn't know how capable Master Shue was? To begin with, he was just a person who brandished his spear and baton and sold medicine in the city square. Even though it was said that there were no true heroes in the wilderness, other than being majestic in bed, did this Master Shue really have the qualifications to lead an army? Anything could be faked, but leading an army to war couldn't be faked. Once a war was lost, not only hundreds of thousands of soldiers would be sacrificed, but hundreds of thousands of families would also be torn apart. It would also affect the rise and fall of the nation and the fate of countless people. However, the empress who had been in the palace since she was 14 didn't seem to realize this. Or perhaps in her eyes, Tens of thousands of casualties were just insignificant numbers. She could actually make rash decisions time and time again, appointing a gigolo who had never been a soldier or fought in a war to be the commander-in-chief of the 3 armies. Of course, for the sake of safety, every time Wu Zetian sent Xue Huai out to battle, she would send some generals who were good at fighting and some experienced and prudent civil officials to form a team of advisors to assist Xue Huai. But with Xue Huai's personality, if he wanted to do things his own way, these advisors were just decorations. On the battlefield, even an incompetent and arbitrary supervisor could make a wise commander feel at a loss, let alone Xue Huai, who was the commander of the 3 armies. If he made a rash decision, the life and death of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, the key to the rise and fall of the country, would be destroyed. Military and national affairs were like child's play. Which wise lord would do such a thing? Last time, Mo had feared the strength of the great Tang army and the instability of the internal politics of the Turkic Khaganate, so he had chosen to avoid battle. Xue Huai had only needed to wave his saber at the air for a while to achieve victory. Would he be so lucky this time? Seeing him in deep thought, Huzello couldn't help but bitterly smile. The emperor has already decided that Master Xue will be the commander-in-chief. Erlang is worried for your master, and this is the relationship between master and disciple. But once the emperor has made up his mind, no one can change it. Yang Fan laughed bitterly and went along with his words. If there's anything, I'll do it for you. Although Yang Fan isn't a famous general who is proficient in military strategy, I'm very willing to accompany Master Xue into battle. However, Yang Fan is currently a minister of the Ministry of Justice. There's no reason for the royal court to send a judge into battle. Yang Fan paused, then said, But Brother Luo's visit, could it be that Brother Luo is also going to war? Huzello also bitterly smiled. Yes, this is Master Xue's suggestion, and the imperial court has not yet responded. But, Erlang should also understand that the imperial court will rarely refuse Master Xue's requests. Yang Fan's eyebrows rose. Then Brother Luo does not want to go? Huzello fell silent. Who would be willing to go with Xue Huai as the commander-in-chief? Yang Fan's question was an unnecessary one. Huzello was silent for a few moments before slowly saying, Although I am the great general of the Right Guard, it is only an empty title. In reality, I am the ruler of the Turks, and my title is Khan. If I were to join the army, I would have to summon the warriors of my tribe to accompany me. But my 10 tribes are weak, and those who follow me into the pass are all old, weak women and children. I truly have no soldiers. Huzello's words were an excuse, and the most fundamental reason was that going to war with Xue Huai was a gamble, but he was also speaking the truth. Yang Fan thought for a moment, and then he suddenly had an idea. He probed, Brother Luo was once the ruler of the 10 tribes of the Turks, so you do have some elite soldiers. They are currently stationed at Dunhuang and Yangguan, very close to Spirit Province. This is probably why Master Xue wants to use Brother Luo. If Brother Luo can mobilize them, and if we succeed in this battle, Huzello said, Wu's Heil is currently in command of all the tribes, and he is compassionate toward the tribes. All the tribes near and far have submitted to him, and his strength is gradually rising. He truly is a useful army. However, my tribe was originally stationed near the 4 garrisons of rest, but now it is difficult for us to return home. It seems that the imperial court wants my 10 tribes to rest and build up strength so that we can be of assistance when the imperial court reclaims the 4 garrisons of rest. In addition, they are currently resisting the attack from the Tufan Empire, so this can be considered a relief for the imperial court's army. It is best not to use them in the siege of Spirit Province. Yang Fan gently sighed and said with a smile, What Brother Luo said makes sense. Since that's the case, this little brother will accompany you to see Master Xue. After hearing Huthro's reply, the trace of guilt in Yang Fan's heart finally dissipated. Huzello's words, whether intentional or not, had already revealed his intentions. He was well aware that Wuzheil had tried to win over the hearts of the tribes, and that more than half of the Western Turkic Khaganate had abandoned him. Even if he hadn't known before, how could he not have heard about this in the last 2 years? And his reaction had been to let nature take its course. It seemed that Huzello, who had inherited the position of Khagan from a young age and had led his people through the cracks between the Tufan Empire and the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, had long ago become exhausted. He had no desire to do anything about Wuzheil's usurpation of power, nor did he have any desire to regain it. Since he had made this choice, Yang Fan had nothing to feel guilty about. Or perhaps he could continue to be a high-ranking official and enjoy riches and riches. He could live in a world of sensual pleasures and live in peace. There was no need for him to lead his people into battle, rushing through the wind and snow over the wastelands. This was the life that Huzello yearned for. Not everyone was passionate about power. Huzello was overjoyed by Yang Fan's agreement. He hurriedly said, "If Erlang is willing to help, I trust that Master Shwe will definitely agree. But I already feel bad about having Erlang do me a favor. If I go with Erlang to the White Horse Monastery, it will seem like I am lacking in sincerity. Why don't I invite Master Shwe to my residence for a banquet? Wouldn't it be better to mention this matter during the banquet?" Yang Fan smiled. "The last time I drank with Brother Luo and Master Shwe was just yesterday. This little brother would naturally wish for nothing more than for the two of us to drink together. Since this is the case, I will go see Master Shwe and invite him to your residence for a banquet." Huzello cheerfully said, "Since this is the case, this Luo will immediately go and make arrangements. This Luo will be waiting for Master Shwe and Erlang at the front of my residence." Because of Huzello's visit, Yang Fan's trip to the Ministry of Justice was delayed. By the time he reached the Ministry of Justice, the various departments had already begun their work. Yang Fan walked around the Ministry of Justice. Qindong was handling files. Seeing Yang Fan's arrival, Qindong hurriedly put down his things and called for the person who had come to handle the matter to wait outside. He chatted in detail with Yang Fan. Qindong had lost Yang Fan and was destined to pack up and leave. However, Yang Fan persuaded him to stay. He knew that Yang Fan's target was not just the Ministry of Justice. His cooperation with Yang Fan could be said to be close and seamless. Currently, Yang Fan was handling the pressure and restraints from above. Qindong was concentrating on the various affairs of the Ministry of Justice. The two of them could be said to be a perfect match, complementing each other. Yang Fan sat in the detention room for a while and then left. With Qindong in the Ministry of Justice, everything was handled flawlessly. It was 100 times better than if Yang Fan handled it himself. Qindong was, after all, a professional and had been immersed in the judicial system for many years. It was not that the Supreme Court and Assistant Minister Chui did not want to cause trouble for the Ministry of Justice. It was just that they could not find him. When he left the detention room, the people waiting outside to handle the matter, and the people from the Ministry of Justice and the Yamen who saw Yang Fan were very polite and respectful. Everyone knew that although Yang Longzhong did not seem to do much, he was the #1 person with real power in the Ministry of Justice. Even in the entire Ministry of Justice, he was the #1 person with real power. Yang Fan did not report to Assistant Minister Chui. He only went to sit with Sun Yuxuan and Yen Xiaojun. He chatted with Manager Feng and Monitor Yuan, who rushed over after hearing the news, and then left the Yamen of the Ministry of Justice. After Yang Fan left the Yamen of the Ministry of Justice, he rushed in the direction of the White Horse Temple. When he galloped on the Tianjin Bridge, he suddenly saw a carriage coming towards him. There were 7 or 8 strong men dressed in bright clothes and riding on horses to protect the carriage. They were waving the horsewhips in their hands. They chased the passers-by along the way. It was truly awe-inspiring. The carriage was very gorgeous. It was decorated with gold and inlaid with jade. The curtains fluttered in the wind. It was a gorgeous, open carriage. Through the curtains that were gently fluttering in the wind, one could clearly see the person sitting in the carriage. There was a young man in the carriage. He was wearing a large robe with wide sleeves in the ancient style of the Han and Jin dynasties. He did not wear a headscarf on his head. He only wore a scarf on his head. His lips were red, his teeth were white, and his complexion was like jade. Because the layer of gauze had a slightly hazy effect, many passers-by were talking about the handsome young man sitting in the carriage. They did not know which family's noble daughter was wearing men's clothing when she went out. She was so ostentatious. The person in the carriage was as beautiful as a blooming lotus. She was exceptionally enchanting and charming. How many people would believe that such a beautiful woman was actually a man? Chapter 448. What was this place? This was Tianjin Bridge. North of the bridge was the imperial city. South of the bridge were the residences of high officials, nobles, and relatives of the imperial family. They had to pass through here if they wanted to enter, or leave the palace, or go to the various government offices. Very few people dared to be ostentatious here. Who knew if they would bump into an official even more powerful than them? But this person did not have any misgivings. When Yang Fan first saw the carriage swagger onto the bridge, he was slightly puzzled. He thought, who is this? Even the emperor's most beloved Princess Taiping or the domineering Wu Sansi would not dare to act like this. In the entire world, probably only teacher Shui would. When Yang Fan thought of this, he saw the person in the carriage, Zhang Changzong. With just one glance, he saw Zhang Changzong, who was more beautiful than a woman. Yang Fan immediately recognized him. So it was him. No wonder he was so arrogant. At this moment, behind Yang Fan, another ox cart slowly galloped over. The banner of an official was raised high. A sharp-eyed scholar saw it and immediately shouted excitedly, "Look! The great Honglu is here. The great Honglu of the 9 ministers is here. The great Honglu is in charge of etiquette and the etiquette of the imperial family and the ministers. This fake man dares to be so ostentatious on Tianjin Bridge. There will be a good show to watch." The great Honglu was now called the Minister of State. He was one of the 9 ministers. He was in charge of the etiquette of the imperial court and received the envoys of the 4 barbarians. He was also in charge of the etiquette of the imperial family and the ministers. In other words, part of the great Honglu's function was like the military police, but it was limited to etiquette. He was not like the imperial messengers who could report everything. The current minister of state of the Zhou dynasty was called Do Lu Qinhuang. Do Lu Qinhuang had just come out of the imperial city with a ceremonial carriage. He sat in the carriage, twirling his beard. He seemed to be very pleased with himself. At present, Li Zhaoda was the most powerful in the imperial court. He was favored and trusted by the emperor and controlled all the civil and military officials. Do Lu Qinhuang saw that Li Zhaoda had monopolized power and was extremely arrogant. He wanted to curry favor with him and expressed his goodwill. Today, Li Zhaoda finally summoned him to the political affairs hall. After a conversation, Do Lu Qinhuang felt that Li Zhaoda seemed to appreciate him and was overjoyed. At this moment, he was thinking about every word that Li Zhaoda had said to him after his meeting with Li Zhaoda. During my visit today, Prime Minister Li specifically mentioned the 3 law departments. He said that the law and discipline are corrupt and the discipline is not upright. What does this mean? I was just an official in charge of etiquette. Li Minister specifically mentioned this to me. Do Lu Qinhuang was in charge when a whip sounded in front. Someone shouted, "Do Lu! Do Qinhuang! Do Do Li Do Do Lu!" When Do Lu heard this, he frowned, instantly displeased. He was one of the 9 ministers, and his position was not low. He could barely be considered an extremely high official. Although he did not have much power, in terms of rank, the number of officials in the court who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him could be counted on one hand. This 6th minister, just from hearing it, he could tell that he was not an official in court. What kind of relative of the emperor was he? As P. Lu was thinking this, his entourage had already stopped and was shouting at the other party. P. Lu snorted coldly, calling out slowly, "Housekeeper! Housekeeper!" The steward of Do Lu's house was called back from the front. Panting with rage, he rolled up his sleeves, looking like a loyal protector of his master. He approached the carriage and said, "Ah Lang, did you call me?" Do Lookin Wang stroked his beard and said unhappily, "Who dares to be so ostentatious on the road ahead, daring to block my honor guard?" The housekeeper said, "I don't know which family's son is from. What a grand show of extravagance! A horse carriage occupying the middle of the road. There's only a young man in the carriage. He's gorgeously dressed and looks like a virgin. He says his surname is something like Zhang, but I've only heard his family servant call him something like Lu Lang. I don't remember any royal relatives being called Lu Lang in the current dynasty." De Lu Qinhuang was originally very displeased, but as soon as he heard this, his mind flashed like lightning. A person he had heard of not long ago suddenly leaped into his mind. Do Lu Qinhuang hurriedly asked, "Surname Zhang, this person's surname is Zhang? His family calls him Lu Lang?" As Do Lu Qinhuang said this, he did not wait for the housekeeper to reply and had already rushed forward. With a schwa sound, he lifted the curtain of the sedan. He stuck his head out to take a look and saw a luxurious carriage with a golden roof and a fluttering gauze curtain. In the carriage, there was a young man dressed in luxurious clothing sitting arrogantly. From his angle, he could only see a very delicate chin. It seemed like he did not care about the quarrel in front of the carriage at all. "It's him, it must be him." Do Lu Qinhuang thought to himself and hurriedly shouted, "All of you, shut up!" Do Lu Qinhuang shouted at his family servant to stop and quickly crawled out of the carriage. As soon as the steward put down the pedal, Do Lu Qinhuang hurriedly lifted his robe and got off the carriage. He quickly walked to the front of the luxurious carriage, cupped his hands, and asked with a face full of smiles, "Excuse me, is this young master in the carriage the 6th Langjun of the Zhang residence of Jishan Lane?" The young man in the carriage was sitting up, playing with something in his hands. He did not pay any attention to Do Lu Qinhuang. One of his servants, dressed in green and wearing a small hat, arrogantly said, "That's right, it is my family's Lu Lang in the carriage. Who are you?" When Do Lu Qinhuang heard this, he hurriedly bowed again and said with a face full of smiles, "Ah, it is indeed Lu Lang. This old man is Si Bin official, Do Lu Qinhuang. I have long heard of young Master Zhang's great name. Seeing you today, you are indeed handsome like a jade tree. Qinhuang is fortunate to be able to see Lu Lang today." The Zhang resident's servant impatiently waved his hand and said, "Go, go, go! Quickly move aside. My family's Langjun wants to enter the palace to see the emperor. If he is delayed, can you bear the responsibility?" Do Lu Qinhuang immediately waved his hand at his servants and said, "Quickly, quickly move the carriage to the side of the road. Please let young Master Zhang pass first." Do Lu Qinhuang's servants did not know who this person was. For his master to curry favor with him, they hurriedly moved the carriage to the side of the road. Do Lu Qinhuang bowed to the carriage again and said flatteringly, "Sorry to disturb young master. Young master, please." At this time, Zhang Changzong finally sat up straight and glanced at him lightly. He lazily asked, "You are Do Lu Qinhuang, right? You are a very good person." Hearing this, Do Lu Qinhuang was filled with joy and smiled even more flatteringly. He hurriedly nodded and bowed, saying, "Yes, yes, yes. This lowly official is indeed Do Lu Qinhuang. It is a sin to disturb young master." Qinhuang respectfully sees young master off. Zhang Changzong smiled and waved his hand. The carriage swaggered off. Do Lu Qinhuang stood there with his buttocks in the air. Only when Zhang Changzong's carriage had left the Tianjin Bridge did he dare to straighten his back. The scholars on the Tianjin Bridge were all dumbstruck. Many of them still could not guess who this young man was to make Do Lu Qinhuang, one of the 9 ministers, treat him with such respect. Yang Fan saw all of this and thought, "It seems that the matter of Zhang Changzong being favored by the Empress is known by most of the officials. However, Teacher Xue is favored by the Empress. He can run amok in Luoyang and do whatever he wants. Compared to Zhang Changzong, his power and dominance are somewhat higher. However, when it comes to the matter of the heir apparent, he can't interfere. I wonder if Taiping's painstaking efforts to promote Zhang Changzong can help her achieve her wish." The small interlude at the bridgehead passed in a moment. The bridgehead returned to its bustling state. After Zhang Changzong and Dolu Qinhuang's carriages left, he urged his horse to continue on to White Horse Temple. Dolu Qinhuang and Zhang Changzong were already thrown to the back of his mind. He did not think that he would have any interaction with them in the future. Yang Fan hurried to White Horse Temple to see Xue Huai. As soon as he saw him, he told him the reason for his visit. He could not hide this matter from Xue Huai. After interacting with him for a long time, he found that Xue Huai was not as straightforward and boorish as others thought. Although he often messed around, he was still quite clever. If he hid anything from him and Xue Huai found out, it would affect their relationship. Moreover, between Xue Huai and Huzuro, he was clearly closer to Xue Huai, so he had no reason to trick Xue Huai. He was willing to help Huzuro because he felt that Xue Huai would not suffer any loss. Azhail had long ago taken over Huzuro's figurehead, so it was impossible for him to mobilize his Western Turkic soldiers who were skilled in battle and most familiar with the Eastern Turks. As for using Huzuro's familiarity with the Turks, that was even less useful. The border army had far more officers and soldiers familiar with the Turks than Huzuro, the nominal king of the Western Turks. He had grown up in the Tang dynasty and only returned to his tribe after he came of age. In just a few years, Azhail had taken over his power and driven him back to the Tang dynasty. How familiar could he possibly be with the Eastern Turkic tribes? Huzuro's greatest skill might have been in riding and archery. But how much use could one man's bravery be on the battlefield? Moreover, the imperial court would never permit Huzuro to charge into the enemy ranks and serve as a general. If he died on the battlefield, he would be far more useful to the imperial court than a general. The current Huzuro had lost all of his spirit and was as lifeless as an old man. Perhaps this was closely related to his 2.5 years in Chang'an. In these 2 years, the entire tribe he had brought into Guangzhou had to live under someone else's roof, so it was impossible for them not to have any complaint about him. Each tribe had its own habits and customs, and there were bound to be many conflicts between them and the natives of Guangzhou. He had to mediate and make all sorts of arrangements, so he was bound to be both mentally and physically exhausted. Ashina Huzuro had long since lost his former spirit, so it was better to let him live a comfortable life as a resident of Luoyang. This was the best outcome for everyone. Ashina Huzuro's residence was in Dunhua Workshop, only 2 workshops away from Yang Fan's residence. In Luoyang, he could be considered a close neighbor. Yang Fan and Xue Huai brought a few trusted disciples to Huzuro's residence. Just by looking at the layout of the residence, they knew that their previous judgment had been correct. Huzuro was the Khagan of the Western Turks, but there was nothing Turkic about the furnishings in his residence. He was a general, but there wasn't even a martial arts arena or weapon rack in his residence. It seemed like this Khagan was truly content to live a peaceful life as a wealthy man. Chapter 449. If one were to say that Hasero still retained some of his Turkic style, it could only be seen in the servants and courtesans of his residence. The majority of the people in Hasero's residence were people of the western regions. In the inner hall, a thick carpet of wool was spread over the floor. 2 rows of beauties in red dresses, their wide sleeves fluttering in the wind as they performed a joyous and enchanting dance from a foreign land. In front of 2 screens, Tensa musicians were focused on playing the zither, drums, and flutes. The 2 rows of 12 dancers had their skirts fluttering in the wind, creating a bewitching and enchanting scene. the author of Volume 34 of 2/4 of Amazement, indulging in pleasure at the ruler's pleasure, Grand Commandant Yang's palace guests, began, "There is not a single wealthy family in the world that does not have concubines. To have a concubine on one's left and a woman of Zhao on the other, to dance and dance in a procession, is the greatest thing in life." These words exposed the true nature of men. The 12 beauties in front of the hall not only had enchanting bodies, but they also had brown eyes and high noses, golden hair and blue eyes, snow-white skin, or tan skin that was as smooth as satin. All of them had a unique and exotic charm that was enchanting and alluring. The beauties were all top-class concubines. The beauty of the concubines had long been renowned in the Tang dynasty, and the dancers of Hasero's residence were all top-class among the concubines. The wine was also excellent, the best quality Jiannan spring wine. The beauties were beautiful, but Xue Huai could do nothing but look at them. This was the sorrow of being a male escort. Everything he had came from the Empress, and what he needed to pay was his body and freedom. Thus, the only thing he could do was drink as much as he could, treating the 3 cups of wine as those provocative beauties and fiercely swallowing them down. Yang Fan naturally wasn't restricted by this. However, he wasn't very interested in putting on a show. He was rather averse to flirting without any feelings. If not for this, he wouldn't have kept his virginity to Luoyang when he was pursued by so many hot and passionate Nanyang girls back in Nanyang. Hasero carefully accompanied Xue Huai by his side. Seeing that Xue Huai was drinking happily, he told him his intentions in a roundabout way. Xue Huai had already heard Yang Fan explain Hasero's intentions to him, so he naturally agreed. Huzello didn't expect Xue Huai to agree so readily. He was pleasantly surprised. In fact, he was worrying too much. He didn't even need to ask Yang Fan for help. As long as he showed some fear in front of Xue Huai naturally wouldn't use him. In Xue Huai's heart, fighting a war was no different from fighting. Deploying troops and arranging formations were never within his considerations. His mind was still stuck on the routine of street fighting. "I have a lot of underlings. I'll block both ends of the alley and use people to crush you to death." If any of the underlings were timid, of course, he would be too lazy to use them. Xue Huai casually agreed to Hasero's request. When he turned his head to look at Yang Fan, he reminded him with drunken eyes, "This time, you've offended the Supreme Court and the Imperial Messenger Station. Wu Qingxi will definitely want to make trouble for you. When I'm not in the capital, you must be careful." Yang Fan's heart warmed. "Master, you must also be careful when you go to war. This disciple wishes Master a quick victory and immediate success." At this point, Yang Fan hesitated for a moment and then seriously reminded, "Master, you should listen to the opinions of your generals when it comes to deploying troops and arranging formations." Xue Huai laughed and raised his cup. "Of course. You don't need to worry too much. When I go out, who can be a match for me? Ha ha ha, let's drink, let's drink. First, we can celebrate how easy it is to obtain military merits." When the news of Mo Gu leading an army to attack Lingzhou reached Luoyang, the imperial court quickly responded and decided to immediately send troops to counterattack. The right guard supporting the nation, the Duke of Yi and the National Guardian Master Xue Huai, were appointed as the commander-in-chief of the 3 armies. In the late autumn of this year, Xue Huai was appointed as the chief supervisor of the crusade against the Path of Defiance. He commanded 200,000 soldiers and had the 2 prime ministers, Yang Jiro and Su Weiwei, as his advisors. A total of 18 generals who were skilled in battle followed him to the war. The reason why there were a total of 18 generals was Xue Huai's request. He felt that 18 was the perfect number for the 18 arhats, which was a good match for him as the Lord Buddha. Wu Zetian purposely stopped the court for a day so that the civil and military officials could see him off. Not only did the civil and military officials come to the 10-mile pavilion to see Xue Huai off, but there were also relatives of the emperor, members of the royal family, and nobles. It was an extremely grand occasion. Perhaps it was because Wu Zetian had a new favorite, but she still hadn't forgotten her old love who had accompanied her for more than a decade, or because she felt apologetic towards him. The standard of this farewell party was even grander than the last time Xue Huai led the army to war. This also made the civil and military officials in the imperial court realize one thing. Xue Huai's favorite had not waned. Outside the Weian Gate, in the 10-mile pavilion, banners covered the sun, and drums and music filled the air. The 200,000 soldiers had gathered, and their weapons and spears were everywhere. The atmosphere was awe-inspiring. Li Zhaoda stood at the forefront and said to Xue Huai, who was dressed in martial attire, "On behalf of His Majesty the Emperor, the civil and military officials, the relatives of the Emperor, and the millions of people of Great Zhou, I offer this humble cup of wine to His Excellency, His Excellency. I wish that His Excellency will be victorious and successful, and that he will return triumphantly soon." Li Zhaoda took a cup of wine from the tray and offered it to Xue Huai, then took another cup and offered him a toast. Xue Huai was dressed in golden armor. He was tall and handsome to begin with, and the radiant golden armor accentuated his brilliance. For those who didn't know his background, just by looking at his appearance and figure, coupled with this kind of armor, he really was an awe-inspiring general. Xue Huai took the cup and downed it in one gulp without saying a word. The blood-red tassel on his helmet trembled in the autumn wind. Li Zhaoda took another cup and offered a toast to Yang Jiro and Su Weiwei. These two prime ministers were worried that they would follow Xue Huai, a muddle-headed man who only knew how to fight rotten battles, to oppose the famous Turkic General Madwa. But in front of so many civil and military officials and relatives of the emperor, they didn't dare to show off. They hurriedly raised their cups and drained it in one gulp. Xue Huai stared at Yang Jiro and Su Weiwei. Seeing that the two had finished their wine, he immediately put on the stirrups. Needless to say, Xue Huai's martial prowess and horsemanship were quite good. The way he mounted his horse was elegant and agile. Xue Huai flipped onto his horse and squeezed the horse's abdomen with his legs. The fine horse galloped forward and galloped for about half a mile in front of the three armies that were as still as mountains. Suddenly he pulled on the reins. The fine horse neighed and stood up. With a clang, Xue Huai unsheathed the saber at his waist. The saber cut through the air like a bolt of lightning and suddenly froze in midair. A thunderous roar exploded in the army. Soldiers, the Turks have the ambition of wolves. They have repeatedly invaded the great Zhou dynasty, plundering our wealth and killing our people. Today, we will go to war for the country. If we do not destroy the Turkic Khaganate, we will not return to the court. If we do not destroy the Turkic Khaganate, we will not return to the court. If we do not destroy the Turkic Khaganate, we will not return to the court. If we do not destroy the Turkic Khaganate, we will not return to the court. The soldiers of the three armies struck the ground with their spears and struck their shields with their sabers and swords, shouting in unison. Xue Huai faced the sky and laughed 3 times, shouting, "Go to war!" With that, he took the lead and galloped into the distance. Wherever the horse passed, a cloud of dust was kicked up. Li Zhaoda smiled, an imperceptible trace of contempt flitting across his lips. With a turn of his body, an imperial guard brought his horse over. The civil and military officials and relatives of the emperor who came to see them off were also chatting in groups of 2s and 3s, preparing to return to the city. "Prime Minister! Princess Taiping has a few words to say to Prime Minister." She, just as Li Zhaoda was about to mount his horse, a trusted imperial guard, quickly walked over and whispered a few words to him. Li Zhaoda's eyes flickered slightly, but he still mounted his horse and sat down firmly. Only then did he arrogantly say, "Then invite Her Royal Highness over." With that, he kicked the stirrups and galloped away, purposely slowing down the speed of the horse. Dolu Qinhuang originally wanted to take this opportunity to get closer to Master Li, but seeing his actions, he knew that there must be a reason, so he did not dare to step forward and disturb him. The civil and military officials were all smart people who wanted to get closer to this powerful prime minister. Seeing this posture, they did not step forward and ask for a snub. Princess Taiping's groom, Su Haod, received Li Zhaoda's reply and hurriedly rushed back to repeat to Princess Taiping what Li Zhaoda had said. He angrily said, "What a vile person, unexpectedly being so rude." He did not think that when he and Monk Shui went on a punitive expedition against the Turks, just because they had different opinions, Monk Shui grabbed his collar and slapped him until he was dizzy. Monk Shui was not willing to let it go. After returning to the capital, he wanted to punish him for disobeying orders. At that time, he begged Her Royal Highness to put in a good word for him in front of the emperor. Princess Taiping, dressed in men's clothing, was waiting there. Hearing Su Haod's words, she could not help but smile and said, "Times have changed. The current Li Zhaoda is the empress' most trusted minister. Naturally, he has the capital to be arrogant. If he asks me to teach him, I will go over." Princess Taiping was smiling. She was not angry. She asked Su Haod to bring a snow-white steed, turned over and mounted it, and chased after Li Zhaoda, who was walking slowly. Princess Taiping caught up with Li Zhaoda and rode side by side with him. She first praised him with a few words. Since he was in charge of the political affairs hall, the ruthless officials had almost disappeared. It was not known whether Princess Taiping did it intentionally or not, but this topic happened to scratch Li Zhaoda's itch. Li Zhaoda immediately spoke with fervor and assurance, expressing his opinion to her. "Your Royal Highness, the harm of the ruthless officials is more than anything." The ruthless officials of the Han dynasty, Jidu, dared to humiliate the ministers in court and did not avoid the nobles. When he was a prefect, as soon as he arrived, he hunted down and killed the playboys, destroying the tyrants. The nobles did not dare to look him in the eye and called him Goshawk. Zhang Tang was even more specialized in ruling the princes, killing the rich merchants, the big families, and the tyrants. He was known for his strength. When Wang Wenshu was ruling Guangping, he wantonly killed the tyrants in the county. He killed more than 1,000 families, and blood flowed for more than 10 miles. In less than a year, he killed so many thieves in the county that not even the barking of dogs could be seen. It could be said that he did not pick up the loose ends on the road. These ruthless officials were not only capable, but most of them were very incorruptible. Jidu never accepted gifts, and when he was in office, he did not even open the private letters written to him by his relatives and friends. After Zhang Tang died, his inheritance was less than 500 gold, and Wang Wenshu did not even have 50 gold. The ruthless officials of the Sui dynasty, Di Sherwin, were even more willing to live in poverty and had no extra money. Such officials, capable and incorruptible, should have been praised by the people. But why is it that from ancient times to the present, from the officials to the common people, all hate them to the bone, and let each and every one of them end up with infamy? Chapter 450. Li Zhaoda sighed. "Because their methods are cruel," he said. "They often use small crimes to commit major crimes. Whenever they encounter a case, they are afraid that it will not be big enough, and they are afraid that it will not be broad enough. Nobody knows whether or not the next moment the steel knife that is used to kill will fall on their head. These people enforce the law for the country, but in reality they have become the biggest destroyers of the law." The ruthless officials tried in vain to solve all problems with harsh punishment, but they completely neglected the root and ignored the actual contradictions. They did not think about how to solve these problems, but used violence and torture to forcibly maintain the situation they wanted. Even if it had a little effect, the backlash would be 100 times more serious. When the ruthless official Yan Yanian was the governor, in order to establish his authority, he gathered all the prisoners on death row in the county government and executed them. Blood flowed for several miles. Thereafter, in the areas under his jurisdiction, anyone who committed a small crime was executed. For a time, there were no more robbers, and the people were almost at peace. However, a few years later, even more people took the risk out of desperation. Robbers swarmed up and became more and more violent. In the end, robbers simply turned into mass rebellion. The common people said, "Better corrupt officials than cruel officials." Why is that? Because although corrupt officials seized wealth and ran amok, they were not as brazen as cruel officials. Against corrupt officials, the common people could at least expose them. Against cruel officials, the common people could only keep their mouths shut. They dared to be angry, but did not dare to say anything, or even did not dare to be angry. Today's cruel officials are even more unbearable than the cruel officials of ancient times. In order to please the emperor and establish political achievements, they do anything. In order to amass wealth and seize power, they also do anything. Knowing the past can serve as a mirror to the present. The cruel officials of ancient times, compared to today's cruel officials, are many times more noble. To the country and the people, they still do more harm than good. Today's cruel officials do more harm than good. Ever since I became the Prime Minister, I have deeply felt the harm of cruel officials. Attacking cruel officials and restoring clarity to the court is what I have always done. Princess Taiping smiled and said, "What the Prime Minister said is very true. Taiping deeply agrees." Ever since Zhou Xing was executed and Lai Junqin was demoted, the cruel officials in the court have ceased their banners and drums, seemingly no longer causing harm. But they are always waiting for an opportunity to make a comeback. A few days ago, during the joint trial of the 3 law departments, they were restless because of this. To prevent them from rising from the ashes, the Prime Minister's responsibility is great. Li Zhaoda said, "This old man has always taken it as my duty to crack down on cruel officials. I wonder if Your Highness has any good ideas on how to crack down on cruel officials?" Princess Taiping said with a smile, "I am just a woman. What kind of brilliant opinion can I have?" But the newly appointed Minister of Justice, Yang Fan, since taking charge of the Ministry of Justice, has made great contributions in bringing order to the Supreme Court and the Imperial Envoy Station. His actions coincide with the Prime Minister's thoughts. Li Zhaoda nodded and said, "Yang Fan, huh? This old man has also paid attention to him before. Unfortunately, his brilliance was short-lived. Now, he has become an ordinary person in the Ministry of Justice and has no achievements." Princess Taiping sweetly said, "Prime Minister Li is wise and far-sighted, but there are also times when he makes a mistake. You must be busy with state affairs, dealing with thousands of affairs every day. That's why there are some omissions." The reason why Yang Fan was showing his ability a little bit now, pretending to be obscure, was only because he was only a doctor of the Ministry of Justice, and above him was his immediate superior, Cui Yuanzong. Cui Yuanzong is timid and afraid of getting into trouble. He has been restraining Yang Fan in every possible way. Even if Yang Fan has 1,000 skills, I am afraid he can't use them. Li Zhaoda's eyes revealed a hint of a smile. He said, "Yang Fan is still too young. There must be someone at the top to control the overall situation. Otherwise, won't he become a runaway wild horse? If he really causes an unmanageable mess, who will clean up the mess for him?" But Cui Yuanzong is indeed lacking some drive. He is in the Ministry of Justice, but he likes to be overcautious and indecisive. This is very inappropriate. Princess Taiping lightly shook her horsewhip and said in a free and easy manner, "That's right. Right now, the position of the Minister of Justice has been vacant for a long time. Minister Cui is also an incompetent person. I think it is time to change the person in charge of the Ministry of Justice." Li Zhaoda lightly knitted his brows. He slowly said, "But Cui Yuanzong did not make any big mistakes as an official. Where can we change him?" Princess Taiping said, "If he did not make any mistakes, then he has performed a meritorious service. With Cui Yuanzong's qualifications, he can be promoted to Prime Minister, right? Prime Minister Li is in charge of the Political Affairs Hall. I believe that if Cui Yuanzong is promoted to Prime Minister, he can do more things by Prime Minister Li's side. As for the Ministry of Justice, if we can change a person who is willing to work and let his subordinates do the work, it will be a good thing for the country and the people. Li Xiaoda's eyes slightly flashed. He asked, "Then, in Princess's opinion, who can be the Minister of Justice?" Princess Taiping said, "Prime Minister Li assists the Emperor and controls the officials. The choice of the Minister of Justice should be decided by Prime Minister Li." Li Xiaoda stroked his beard and smiled. He slowly said, I feel that the current Minister of Justice, Dolu Qinwang, has a steady temperament and can be of great use. Unfortunately, his qualifications are not enough." Princess Taiping said, "The so-called qualifications are all created by people. Everyone thinks he has the qualifications, so naturally he has the qualifications. If Prime Minister Li is interested in Dolu Qinwang, although I am not in the officialdom, I still have some connections. If Prime Minister Li makes a suggestion, I am willing to help Prime Minister Li wave the flag and shout the battle cry." Li Xiaoda hurriedly cupped his fists and said, "Old man's painstaking effort is all for the people of the world. If Princess can facilitate this matter, Old man will really thank Princess Benevolence on behalf of the world." Princess Taiping smiled and said, "I do not dare to accept Prime Minister Li's thanks." Taiping thought that the current Ministry of Justice does not have enough officials. Since Prime Minister Li wants to use the Ministry of Justice to take the lead in cleaning up the country's laws and regulations, the Ministry of Justice must have more astute and capable officials. In my humble opinion, if Dolu Qinwang becomes the Minister of Justice, he will need an assistant minister who can cooperate with him in order to avoid repeating the mistake of the left and right ministers fighting for power. As far as I know, the left remonstrating official Tao Wenjie is familiar with the law, astute and capable. He has a calm temperament and treats people generously. If he is appointed as the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, I believe he will bring out the best in Dolu Qinwang." Li Xiaoda let out a soft sound and said in a low voice, "The left remonstrating official Tao Wenjie? Old man knows a thing or two about his character. If this person becomes the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Old man thinks he can take on this heavy responsibility." Speaking to this point, the two of them looked at each other and smiled, with a tacit understanding. Just like that, an important appointment was completed on horseback. The deputy imperial censor, Wan Guojun, rode an old horse, walking lazily at the side of the procession returning to the city. Right now is not the time for the imperial censor to show off. Riding an old horse will make it appear more low-key. Not far ahead, Yang Fan sat tall and straight on a date-red horse. Wan Guojun stared coldly at his back and said to Wei Suizhong, who was riding beside him, "How is it? You still haven't found any evidence against him?" Wei Suizhong was originally a ruffian in the streets, but was promoted by Lai Junqin. Even though he is now an imperial censor, his ruffian nature has not changed. Just now, when the court officials sent off General Xue from the capital, he could still pretend. Now that he is riding on a horse, his waist is slumped and his shoulders are slanted. There is no trace of an official. He used his horsewhip to rub his head and said in distress, "I have arranged for a few imperial censors who understand the law to look for mistakes in his official duties. But Yang Fan is not doing anything at all. That Chen Dong has always been careful in his work, and now he is even more watertight. It is even more impossible to find loopholes in his cases. This person has been working in the Ministry of Justice for half his life. Will he let us find any evidence against him?" Wan Guojun thought for a moment and said, "Then what about his personal integrity? Is there nothing wrong with his moral integrity? Hasn't he been with Princess Taiping recently?" Wei Suizhong spread his hands and said he really hasn't. These days he has been going in and out of some nunneries and temples with people from the Luoyang prefecture. Didn't you say that this matter involves Prince Wei and Prince Liang and told us not to interfere? I didn't pay much attention to it. These 2 days, I heard that he has been going to some nunnery, but there is no one from the Luoyang prefecture accompanying him." Wan Guojun frowned and said doubtfully, "He doesn't want the company of the Luoyang prefecture, but goes to a nunnery alone. What is the meaning of this?" Wei Suizhong chuckled and said, "Who knows? Could it be that he found some pretty nun in the nunnery while working on a case and wants to seduce her?" Wei Suizhong was just joking, but Wan Guojun's eyes lit up and said, "Brother Wei's words might really be true. This person has an affair with Princess Taiping, so he must be greedy for riches and is infatuated with women. What is he doing in a nunnery alone? That doesn't make sense. What you're saying is more reasonable." Wei Suizhong's interest was also piqued. Could it be that there was a little nun in the nunnery who was so beautiful that this Yang Langzhong, who had already broken the flower of Luoyang, was infatuated with her? He immediately said excitedly, "If that's the case, I will send someone to keep a close eye on him. If I have time, I will personally go and watch him." Princess Taiping's carriage was also mixed in with a large group of royal relatives, slowly making its way into the city. From Shirley Pavilion to the city gate, there is still a considerable distance. The long line of people and carriages to see her off stretched on the official road for several li, moving slowly. Behind Princess Taiping's carriage was an ox cart. 2 large green ox carts had shiny fur and 2 plates of thick and strong horns on their heads, looking very majestic. The curtains of the carriage were drawn down, so no one could see what was going on inside. Today there were all kinds of people who came to see Shui Huai off. Many of them were not familiar with each other, so no one knew who was in the carriage without an official banner, and they were too lazy to ask. The person sitting in the carriage was young Master Jiang, and beside him was Situ Liang. Lu Boyan did not follow him out. Even though old man Lu's martial arts were superb, he was old and did not have enough energy. On top of that, he was injured. Even an Iron Man would not be able to endure the long journey from Chang and to here. At this moment, he was resting in Princess Taiping's residence to recuperate. Bamboo curtains were hung on the carriage. From the inside, one could vaguely see the pedestrians outside, but the people outside could not see the passengers inside. At this moment, young Master Jiang was sitting upright in the carriage, staring at the back of Yang Fan, who was sitting upright on the horse in front of him. His eyes were cold. If looks could kill, Yang Fan would have been riddled with holes by now. Chapter 451. Young Master Jiang stared fixedly at Yang Fan. After staring for a while, he lightly sighed, leaned his body on the seat, and slightly closed his eyes. Situ Liang coldly looked outside, slightly leaned forward, and asked in a low voice, "Do you want me to go kill him?" Young Master Jiang indifferently said, "What's the point of killing him? This young master never does pointless things." Situ Liang said, "But anew, because of him." Young Master Jiang suddenly opened his eyes, his gaze was cold, and Situ Liang immediately shut his mouth. Young Master Jiang coldly glanced at him, then slowly closed his eyes and indifferently said, "A man cannot stand without his words. This young master's words carry enormous weight. I will definitely keep them." Situ Liang lowered his head and said, "Yes." Situ Liang agreed, but his eyeballs slightly moved. Young Master Jiang was not the only one who liked Anu. Young Master Jiang had always been a clean freak, and his eyes were at the top of his head. He did not realize before that he had already deeply liked Anu, and even if he did, his love was a bit different. He would be satisfied as long as Anu stayed by his side, or he liked a kind of spiritual love and satisfaction, and any physical contact was dirty to him. However, there was actually another person who liked Anu, and that was Situ Liang. Back then, when he accompanied the young master to the empty village filled with disaster victims, it was him who followed the young master's orders to carry that skinny, light as a feather girl onto his horse. At that time, he never thought that there would be a day where he would be so infatuated with her. However, he had served the young master since he was young, and knew how deep and strange the young master's obsession with cleanliness was. However, the young master was actually willing to let Anu serve him by his side. This was unprecedented. Just based on this, Anu could only be the young master's exclusive property, even if she was only kept by the young master's side as a maid. Situ Liang, who had served the young master like a god since he was young, did not dare to have any extravagant hopes for Anu. However, he never would have thought that Anu would actually like that stinky brat named Yang. Anu belongs to the young master. Even I don't dare to have any delusions about her. How could this young guy get her heart? Thinking of this, Situ Liang's heart burned with jealousy. Right now, Yang Fan was right in front of him, and it was because of him that Anu jumped off the cliff, and her corpse was stuffed in the stomach of a beast. Looking at his straight back, Situ Liang's heart was filled with killing intent. Anu is dead. This person also deserves to die. In the middle of the night, the little nun entered the temple, hugging the small wooden fish in her arms, her eyes brimming with tears. She scolded her father and mother, saying that she had no hope in her old age. At the second watch, Big Sister came to burn incense. She was really beautiful in red and green. She was hugging her son and kept calling him mother. Yang Fan was sitting cross-legged in the nunnery with a cushion under his buttocks. He was humming a few lines. Suddenly he felt strange and said, "Hey, little Shirtai Yuanjing, why do you think this Big Sister came to burn incense on the second watch of the night? The temple is closed at the second watch, and she is a woman with a child in her arms. Hey, don't go." Little Nun Yuanjing was so angry that she pouted her lips and stomped out of the nunnery. Yang Fan shook his head and sang again. In the third watch, I dreamed that a little scholar came. My left hand was holding the scholar's umbrella, and my right hand was holding the scholar's clothes. When I woke up, I saw I was alone. In the fourth watch, the little nun went to her morning class. She knocked on the wooden fish and chanted Amitabha. In the abbot's room, the Ding-Ding nun, who had been troubled by Yang Fan, tried to persuade the little nun Jinglian. Jinglian, cultivators can't be jealous. The happiness of all living beings is our happiness, and the joy of all living beings is our joy. You can't have greed, hatred, or jealousy. Tin Eno blinked at her and said hesitantly, "Master, didn't you say that I need to have a Buddhist heart and not be moved by the 6 emotions before I can enter Buddhism? Now Yang Fan is my external demon. If I am not moved, won't I have a firm Buddhist heart and Zen nature? Master should be happy for me." The Ding-Ding nun nodded repeatedly and said, Happy, of course I'm happy. But, ahem, your jealousy. I'm not jealous. I'm only devoted to Buddhism." That's right. However, everything has a cause and an effect. Yang Fan's appearance here is the cause that you created. That's why you've created such an effect today. Of course, you have to eliminate your karma. How do you eliminate it? You should renounce asceticism immediately and go back with him. If you are devoted to Buddhism, even if you can't serve Buddha in this life, it will be beneficial for your cultivation in the next life since you have sowed good karma. Ding-Ding nun counted her rosary beads. In order to coax away this good disciple who she thought was the most intelligent and was ready to pass on her mantle, she painstakingly explained, "Jinglian, don't deny it. It's because of your resentment towards Yang Fan and jealousy towards the Yang family's wife that you decided to sacrifice yourself to become a monk. In this way, you can't become a bodhisattva because this is all your karma. If you don't eliminate your karma, how can you become a Buddha? You have to eliminate your karma first. How do you eliminate your karma? Of course, you have to form a good karma with him. If you do that, you have to marry him. If he is happy, your karma will be eliminated. The Infinite Life Sutra says, "Don't be angry or jealous." The Ding-Ding nun was almost driven crazy by Yang Fan. She was well versed in Buddhism and knew some Buddhist monks with high status. However, when she finally asked someone to complain to the Luoyang government, they ignored her when they heard that it was Yang Fan. She then went to the temple to complain. When the temple heard that it was someone with Abbot Huai Yi's decree, they almost threw her out. There was such a young and handsome man sitting in the nunnery every day. Not only did he attract the attention of the Buddhist monks who came to offer incense, they also gossiped about him, seeing that the young and weak nuns in the temple were somewhat half-hearted. How could the Ding-Ding nun not be anxious? Anu wanted to exorcise the devil and settle her Buddhist heart. In the eyes of the Ding-Ding nun, the little nun Jinglian was the devil of the tranquil nunnery. She must be exorcised. The Ding-Ding nun was eloquent and chattered. If you drive Yang Fan away, will you be able to focus on cultivating Buddhism? No. Then you will have obstacles on the path of Bodhi. Not only will you not be able to cultivate Tao, you may even fall into the 3 paths. Then what should I do? You have to change from the point of view, from the point of view of the heart. All right, disciple, we'll think about it. Tineno was dizzy from the Ding-Ding nun's words. She had no choice but to agree, hesitantly. The Ding-Ding nun saw that her tone was a little relaxed. She couldn't help but feel happy. She quickly put her palms together and said, Amit Ba, it's best that you can consider this matter carefully. If you can step out of Buddhism, then you will have truly stepped into Buddhism. You will have the nature of Buddhism and cultivate your Buddhist heart. With such a solemn and perfect state, you will be praised by all the Buddhas, protected by bodhisattvas, and praised by the demigods and 8 tribes. The Ding-Ding nun never realized that she had such eloquence. She had talked so much and finally managed to persuade Tineno to relax her guard. How could she not praise her? Tineno put her palms together to thank her master. Just as she walked out of the meditation room, a few old nuns sneaked in. They asked the Ding-Ding nun impatiently, Has Jinglian made up her mind to leave? The Ding-Ding nun said, Jinglian has agreed to consider it carefully. The old nuns put their palms together and chanted the name of Buddha, Namo Merciful Bodhisattva, who saves the suffering. In the West Room, Yuan Jing and a few other young nuns were preaching to Tineno, who had just walked in. Yuan Jing said, Jinglian, you can't easily agree to him. Even if you have decided to return to secular life, you have to delay him and pressure him. Otherwise, he will definitely look down on you. That's right. He's a man. The easier it is to get, the less he will cherish it. This is what senior sister Yuan Qin, who was forced to become a nun after her husband divorced her. If you leave with him as soon as he asks, will he take you seriously? Besides, he already has a wife. What kind of status would you have in the Yang family? You have to make him give you a promise. Well, what you said is very reasonable. I can't easily agree to him. Tineno, who had been fooled by the Ding-Ding nun, just wanted to find a quiet place to think. He didn't want to be annoyed by them again. So he casually agreed, apologized to them, and hid in the back of the meditation room. Hey! As soon as Anu left, the young nuns excitedly clapped their hands. The little nun Yuan Jing said joyfully, If Jinglian leaves a few days later, we will be able to eat a few more delicious vegetarian dishes. Another little nun said excitedly, I have to hurry up and ask her to make a few more sets of clothes for me before she leaves. At dusk, the little nun Yuan Jing angrily walked in front of Yang Fan. She put one hand on her forehead and said with a straight face, Monk Wang, it's getting late and the monastery is about to close. You should leave. Usually, Yang Fan would come after noon, about 2 hours before the yamen was dismissed. He came to the nunnery and sat there. Whether Tianai Nu was willing to see him or not, he would leave when the sun set over the western hills, regardless of whether Tianai Nu was willing to see him. Yang Fan's move was the trick of a strong woman is afraid of being pestered by her husband. In his opinion, there was no hard knot between him and Anu. Anu became a nun because of a moment of anger and sadness. At this time, she was in a dilemma. The process of pestering him was the process of making her heart soften. Moreover, he didn't believe that the old nuns in the temple would not help him if he harassed her every day. In fact, from many details, he had felt that the old nuns in the temple had changed their attitude. It seemed that in order to stop him from coming to the nunnery, the old nuns really hoped that Anu would serve the devil. When Yang Fan occasionally saw Anu, Anu's angry and shy look also made him feel that rather than saying that Anu was still angry with him and hurt his heart, it was better to say that she was helpless in the face of her lover's obsession, or there was even a little bit of joy in her heart. Yang Fan smiled at Yuan Jing with a good temper, stood up and patted his buttocks, and said to the little nun Yuan Jing, "Okay, then I'll go back now. Please send my regards to Miss Anu, little nun." The little nun Yuan Jing pouted and did not speak. Yang Fan got up and walked out. The little nun Yuan Jing followed behind him and waited for the monastery gate to close. Yang Fan walked to the courtyard, glanced at the backyard, sighed softly, and walked towards the monastery gate. Chapter 452. There was a thick old tree in the side room of the nunnery. Tin Ano hid behind the old tree, her heart pounding. Yang Fan almost saw her just now. Fortunately, she hid in time. Tin Ano pressed her chest and heaved a sigh of relief. She quietly leaned out to look outside. From this angle, she could no longer see Yang Fan's figure. The Tian Ai Nu looked around and did not see any other nuns around. She then leaped onto the wall of the nunnery like a nimble leopard cat. In a flash, she disappeared into the bushes outside the wall. Tin Ano was only afraid of the feeling of being abandoned. She was angry because Yang Fan married her without telling her. If she really hated Yang Fan, why would she pick up the butcher's knife without hesitation when she learned that Yang Fan was in prison? There was still a faint smell of blood on the candlestick in front of the Buddha hall. Yang Fan's confession that day, coupled with his continuous visits to the tranquil nunnery, had softened her heart. Just as Yang Fan expected, she was just shy and reserved as a girl. She could not let go of her pride. In fact, for the past few days, every night when Yang Fan left, she would follow him out until she sent him out of the jungle. It was already late autumn, and the trees were rustling. When the autumn wind passed, the few remaining leaves on the branches would flutter down like butterflies. Yang Fan walked alone in the forest. He stepped on the rustling leaves and bathed in the sunset. The sunset was as red as blood, plated his body with a layer of blood. Yang Fan walked on the familiar path in the forest. His footsteps were light and silent. Suddenly he lifted his front foot. It was about 3 inches away from the ground, and his body froze there. The autumn wind blew, and a few withered yellow leaves floated down and landed on his shoulder. The desolate branches swayed in the autumn wind, and the yellow leaves on the ground trembled slightly, as if there were countless silkworms beneath them, trying their best to arch their bodies. Yang Fan remained motionless. Perhaps it was only for a moment, but Yang Fan suddenly moved. His right leg, which was in the air, suddenly retracted, stepped and kicked. His movement was as fast as lightning. The yellow leaves on the ground that had been swept up by the wind seemed to have been struck by lightning. With a pung sound, they splashed up and scattered everywhere. Yang Fan quickly retreated as the fallen leaves exploded into snowflakes that filled the sky. There was a pung sound, leaving half of his sleeve behind. It was shredded into pieces by a ray of cold light, like butterflies flying in the air. Yang Fan flashed again, flashed 3 times, and his figure was already 7 jong away. Every time he landed on the ground and sprang back, there would be a flash of cold light the moment his figure disappeared. Wherever the cold light passed, trees would break, branches would shatter, and sawdust would fly. Yang Fan retreated 7 jong away before he could pull out his saber. As soon as the saber was unsheathed, the cold light, wrapped in a whirlwind, attacked his side. But Yang Fan was not a tree, nor was he a branch. He would not obediently stand there and wait to be chopped. The 2 cold lights intertwined, like 2 silver shuttles flying back and forth in the air, drawing out silver splendor. The crimson setting sun shone on these 2 rays of cold light, causing the rays of light that filled the sky to be tinged with a hint of blood. The densely intertwined light suddenly separated and then combined again. The momentum of the two lights changed greatly. The saber in Yang Fan's hand swung and closed, suddenly advancing and retreating, as if it had formed a dancing waterfall around his body. But the cold light opposite him was still like a silver shuttle piercing through the air, advancing and retreating, small and compact. Suddenly, the two weapons fiercely collided, creating a string of sparks. The two people suddenly separated, each like a wild goose leaping back more than 10 zhang, and then stood upright. Only then did Yang Fan see the person's appearance. This was a very ordinary-looking middle-aged man, probably only in his early 30s. He looked very much like an honest man who had been working in a shop for more than 10 years. But now he was holding a saber in his hand, a single-edged, narrow, and strangely shaped short saber. The appearance of the saber was very strange, but Yang Fan knew better than anyone how terrifying this strange saber was. If his movements had been slightly slower, he would already be a dead man with his stomach cut open. This person's saber technique was very crafty and strange. Yang Fan's ancestor was a great master of the saber, and he knew the world's saber techniques in detail. Generally speaking, the sword was light and agile, and the saber technique was hard and fierce. But this ordinary-looking person in front of him used a saber technique that combined the lightness of the sword and the fierceness of the saber, and even had a kind of crafty and ruthless edge to it. "Why do you want to kill me?" Yang Fan asked coldly. He didn't reveal his identity, nor did he say any useless nonsense. To deliberately attack him in this place, it was definitely not because they recognized the wrong person or some other inexplicable reason. The other party definitely came prepared, and the person they wanted to kill was him. But Yang Fan really couldn't think of anyone who would use assassination methods to deal with him. Ever since he arrived in Luoyang, he had always been the one pretending to be an assassin, killing Yang Mingxing, killing Qiu Shinji, killing Xinke Miao. This was the first time he was assassinated by someone else, and the first time he encountered a troublesome expert who used the saber. Situ Liang laughed and only said one sentence, "Because you deserve to die." Then, like a mad dog, he pounced forward again. His appearance was like an honest man who was praised by his neighbors as having an extremely good temper, an extremely gentle temperament, and someone who wouldn't make a fart after being kicked 3 times. But his current actions were like an honest man who suddenly discovered that his wife had been slept with by someone else, and that his child was raised by someone else. He held a narrow and short saber and fiercely pounced forward. This time he switched to short and fast steps. Yang Fan discovered that every time his feet landed on the ground, it wasn't the tip of his foot, but the outside or inside of his foot. His footwork was just like his saber, similarly unconventional and incomparably dangerous. He closed in with unbelievably fast steps. The short saber in his hand was like raindrops as it slashed towards Yang Fan from all sorts of inconceivable angles. The current Situ Liang was like a spinning top, and Yang Fan was the center of the spinning top. Or perhaps Yang Fan was the spinning top, and he was the whip that whipped the spinning top. The two sabers clashed like beans being fried, short and intense. The two of them were spinning rapidly, and the leaves around them were spinning rapidly as well. There were drops of blood in the air, but it was unknown who was injured. Crack! A teeth-numbing sound rang out. Yang Fan's saber and Situ Liang's saber suddenly broke at the same time. Yang Fan lost the initiative, and it was his first time encountering such a tricky and strange saber technique. He was still not used to the opponent's fighting style, and as Situ Liang closed in on him, it was hard for him to use his long saber. His body had already received a few saber wounds, but luckily he was able to protect himself in time, so the wounds weren't deep and they weren't fatal. However, he was clear in his heart that if the opponent continued to fight like this, he would die without a doubt if he made even the slightest mistake. Thus, he found an opportunity to forcefully clash with Situ Liang's saber. With a clash and a twist, the two sabers broke. This time, it was Yang Fan who took the initiative. As soon as the saber broke, Situ Liang was startled. Yang Fan was already mentally prepared, but the moment the saber broke, he had already pounced forward. He lowered his body, grabbed Situ Liang's leg, and twisted his elbow towards his lower abdomen, causing Situ Liang to fall on his back. Yang Fan then fiercely pressed forward. Not only was Yang Fan good at saber techniques, he was also good at wrestling techniques. As he pounced forward, the two of them began to fight on the ground, rolling and rolling like two dragons rolling on the ground. If an outsider who didn't know the ropes saw this, the two of them fighting right now would be no different from hoodlums in the alleys. Although the fists hit the flesh and the fight was fierce, it didn't have the demeanor of an expert at all. Would an expert fight like a rolling dragon, entangling and rolling on the ground? However, Situ Liang, who was in the middle of it, had a hard time saying anything. Yang Fan's ferocious and fierce fighting style seemed to be without any style, but it was actually very methodical. It was definitely not something that a hoodlum could use in a fight. Within the fists there were falls, and within the falls there were fists, and within the falls there were fists, making it impossible to defend against. Although the two of them were entangled together, twisting and turning in the space of several meters around them like two entangled dragons, Yang Fan was always able to cleverly interweave his fists and legs while entangling him. Even if it was a few inches away, the power of the fists was still extremely powerful. Just now, Situ Liang relied on his advantage and strange saber techniques to open up a few wounds on Yang Fan's body. However, right now he was being dragged to the ground by Yang Fan. In an instant he was beaten black and blue, and two of his ribs were broken. It was just that he didn't notice in the fierce fight that he had already started to vomit blood. Situ Liang was better than Yang Fan in terms of fighting techniques and martial arts attainments, but once it turned into this kind of close combat that only focused on speed and power, and Yang Fan was good at wrestling, how could he still be an opponent for Yang Fan? Yang Fan's storm-like punches and kicks made Situ Liang dizzy and disoriented. Situ Liang saw that he couldn't go on like this, so he gathered a mouthful of qi from his dantian and forcefully endured dozens of heavy punches. Finally, he caught his breath. He let out a loud roar and coiled his legs around Yang Fan's legs. He bent his upper body and pressed his head against Yang Fan's as he reached his hands into his boots. He still had a saber. He was originally an assassin. If he didn't try to fight Yang Fan head-on and kill him fair and square, so he purposely revealed his tracks to let Yang Fan discover him and instead launched a surprise attack. Then Yang Fan would have already become a cold corpse. Now that he had no choice, Situ Liang finally pulled out his second saber. His 5 fingers reached out, and he grabbed onto the hilt of the saber in his boots. However, the dazzling saber aura only appeared halfway before it forever stopped there. On his chest, a twisted little snake suddenly appeared. That little snake was dark red in color, and it was still dripping blood drop by drop. In just a moment, that drop of blood turned into a line of blood, as if it was the tongue of a poisonous snake that was swaying in the wind. It was a branch, and the branch wasn't straight. The branch was a bit crooked, and after being dyed red by the blood, it blurred its original shape. The branch that came out from Situ Liang's chest wasn't thick. It was a bit thinner than a pinky, but the part that pierced through his chest was as thick as a chicken egg. The branch was held in a white and beautiful hand, and that hand was slowly releasing it inch by inch. The branch that was more than 3 feet long hung over Situ Liang's body. Chapter 453. Situ Liang lowered his head in shock and looked at the bloody branch that pierced through his chest. He then looked at Yang Fan in despair before turning his head with difficulty, wanting to see who did this to him from behind. "You. How are you?" Before he even turned his head, he heard a very familiar voice. Situ Liang felt as if he was struck by lightning as his entire body froze on the spot. "It's her. It's actually her. She didn't die. It's actually her. She killed me. Every time Tin Ano left with Yang Fan, she would always jump out from the side of the nunnery and sneak out from the bushes beside the river. Luckily, Yang Fan didn't walk very fast, so she could catch up to him every time. Then, she would follow him closely until he left the forest before reluctantly returning to the nunnery. Today, Anu came from the river. She didn't even walk a few steps before she saw the blade light and killing intent. Shocked, Anu quickly rushed closer. At this time, Yang Fan had already decisively broken the steel blade and began to fight with the opponent. With just one glance, Anu knew that these two people were definitely in a life and death battle. She immediately broke a branch and rushed over. Tin Ano was someone who even dared to kill the emperor, so why would he care who this person was? Since he wanted to kill Yang Fan, then he would just kill him. Anu landed cleanly and pierced through Situ Liang's back. Seeing the blood stains on Yang Fan's body, she couldn't help but panic. She rushed to Yang Fan's side and asked with a trembling voice, "How are you?" As soon as she said this, her eyes were filled with tears. She was scared to tears. Actually, Yang Fan's injuries weren't that serious. However, even if it was just a scratch, if the bleeding wasn't stopped in time, it would still be dyed red. Not to mention that he was cut by a blade, followed by a series of intense punches and kicks. He didn't have time to stop the bleeding, so the blood stains were scattered everywhere, making it seem like he was heavily injured. Anu walked past Situ Liang and hugged Yang Fan. She was so nervous that her entire body was trembling. From start to finish, she did not even look at Situ Liang. She had been trained as an assassin since she was a child, so she was very confident in her skills. Although the branch was not as straight as a sword, she was confident that she could pierce through the heart of the person who was fighting with her Langjun. This person was definitely going to die. At this moment, he had no strength to resist at all. So what was there for her to worry about? As for that person's identity, it didn't matter if he was a noble or a commoner. In her eyes, it was only a matter of whether he deserved to die or not. She didn't care about anything else. Situ Liang suddenly saw Tin Ano, who he thought had died a long time ago. He was first happy, then shocked, then sad. His expression was indescribably complicated, and it was impossible to describe what kind of emotion he was feeling. He wanted to open his mouth to speak, but his ribs were first broken by Yang Fan, and his heart was pierced by a new sword. Blood quickly flowed out from his wounds and mouth, and he had already used up his last bit of strength. How could he even shout out a single word? In reality, because his heart was pierced, he had even stopped breathing. It was just that at the moment of his death, his last bit of consciousness was still awake, and he could still receive messages from the outside world. But he was already unable to make any reaction. I'm fine. Yang Fan could still be considered calm during the fierce battle. At this moment, his life and death were already decided. Thinking back to the various dangers he faced and how he almost passed by the gates of hell several times, his heart was extremely shocked. However, seeing Anu suddenly appear and show such concern for him, Yang Fan's heart was filled with joy, and all the fear had already disappeared. "You still say it's not heavy." Tin Ano began to wipe his tears. "Why are you causing trouble everywhere? Look at your body full of injuries, and you're bleeding so much," Yang Fan said with a bitter smile. "It's not that I'm causing trouble, I don't even know him. My injury is really not heavy. As long as I apply medicine and bandage it, I will be able to jump around in less than 2 days. You don't have to worry." Yang Fan took the opportunity to hold her little hand and continued to seduce her. "Anu, send me home. I'm afraid I can't walk back by myself in this state." The more Yang Fan said that his injury was not heavy, the more Tin Ano did not believe it. When Yang Fan said that if no one sent him home, he would not be able to go home, Tin Ano was even more at a loss and quickly asked, "Where are your injuries? Let me see." Yang Fan said embarrassedly, "Injuries better not look at. I'll bandage it myself." Tin Ano said angrily, "Why don't you use it? Can't I help you bandage it?" Yang Fan laughed dryly and said, "Cough, cough. Let's not, my My injuries are either at the base of my thigh or the back of my, but if you don't mind, then I'll take off my clothes. Tineno was angry. Even at this time, you're still talking nonsense and teasing me. How are you injured in those places? Yang Fan said innocently, I'm not lying. How would I know why I'm injured in those places? This crazy killer, I don't know where he learned his blade technique from. His blade technique is very tricky, specifically attacking places that are hard to attack and hard to defend. Who is he? Anu then turned her head to take a look, and with just a glance, she cried out in shock, Situ Liang! Situ Liang's eyes were wide open without any reaction. He was heartbroken. No matter if it was physically or mentally, he was really heartbroken to death. Yang Fan looked at Tin Eno's expression, and then looked at Situ Liang, who looked very ordinary when he was alive, but looked very horrifying when he was dead, and asked, You know him? Anu said, while stuttering, Yes, he's someone by young master's side. He's called Situ Liang. Yang Fan lightly sighed and said, So it wasn't me who caused the trouble, it was you who caused the trouble. The sun was setting in the west, and the twilight was even more boundless. Yang Fan tore off a piece of cloth and simply bandaged the wound. Situ Liang had already disappeared. He was buried in the depths of the forest. The fallen leaves were blown by the wind, and very quickly the place where he was buried was flattened. Perhaps many years later, when the population of Luoyang multiplied and this forest became houses, people would dig out a skeleton from the ground to prove that he once existed. Yang Fan and Tin Eno first went back to the tranquil sect. Nun Ding Ding gave the fattest nun's robe to Yang Fan, so the bloodstained Yang Fan also became a nun. Nun Ding 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 received a strict warning from Yang Fan. There was never a woman named Yi Tianai in her nunnery, and there was never a little nun named Jinglian. Otherwise, it would bring her nunnery a lot of trouble. Then, regardless of whether Tin Eno was willing or not, she could only leave the nunnery with Yang Fan. The last ray of the setting sun hung on the treetops, and two beautiful little nuns stood under the tree. One looked a little more like a man, and the other looked a little more like a woman. You can't stay here anymore. Since young Master Zhang's people can find this place, it's not safe for you to stay here. It's better to go home with me. Yang Fan said after listening to a new talk about what happened at the peak of Mount Hua. Tin Eno looked at him in surprise and asked, Do you understand what I said? His target is you. If I stay with you, wouldn't that be harming you? Do you know how powerful young master is? As long as he wants to, he can definitely kill you. I don't know, and I don't believe it. Yang Fan said calmly, I used to think that if I learned a lot of skills, I would be able to dominate the world. When I grew up and really stepped into the circle, I realized that there are too many things that can't be solved with just a body of martial arts. The so-called relying on a body of martial arts to settle debts of gratitude and enmity, to dominate the world, to be omnipotent, to make the nobles bow their heads, is only a story that will happen in the legends of sword immortals. Only those naive children will believe it. I'm not a child, but you've been with young Master Zhang since childhood, just like a child who believes that his father is the most powerful man in the world. His ability has long been rooted in your heart, and you've exaggerated it countless times, but you yourself haven't realized it. Yang Fan, I'm not joking. I'm not joking either. As far as I know, he fought with Shen Mu in Chang, and returned defeated. If he could be invincible with Lu Boyan by his side, then he wouldn't have lost to that guy Shen Mu. That guy doesn't know martial arts at all. If it's a fight, even I can pinch him to death with one finger. How can you pinch him to death with one finger? You're arguing again. I'm saying that martial arts isn't omnipotent. One finger. Of course I can't pinch him to death, but I can poke him to death. Tin Eno took a deep breath and said, No matter if you pinch or poke me, I'll leave, but I can't go with you. I'll hide to the ends of the earth. No matter how great young master is, he won't be able to find me. As long as he can't prove that I'm still alive, he won't go back on his promise and attack you. Yang Fan raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, Do you think I'll let you leave? I won't allow it. Tin Eno was annoyed and said coldly, "If I want to leave, can you stop me?" Yang Fan also said coldly, "Do you want to try?" The autumn wind was bleak and the sun was setting. The shadows of the two people who were in the starting position were elongated. One was a man and the other was a woman. In the autumn wind, the man who was in the starting position could be heard saying faintly, "My wound is bleeding again. If you have the heart to do it, then let's do it." Not long after, the man got on the back of the woman, and the two of them merged into one. The two of them slowly walked out of the forest, leaving behind this dialogue along the way. "You don't need to carry me, I can walk. Don't force yourself. Don't talk nonsense. Cough. That stab just now was really dangerous, and I almost became a eunuch. If I didn't dodge fast enough. Even thinking about it now makes me break out in a cold sweat. You deserve it. This is what you get for bullying me. Did I bully you? I'm innocent. I didn't know anything. You don't know anything, so you're not bullying me." That's true. But according to the law of our dynasty, mistakes, no matter how big, must be forgiven. No matter how small, must be punished. Miss Anu, shouldn't you give me a lighter punishment? Do you think this is your yamen of the Ministry of Justice? I don't even want to reason with you. Do I need to reason with you? You also know that you're unreasonable. What did you say? Nothing. Nothing. Chapter 454. Ever since the case of the 3 law departments, Yang Fan had always given people the feeling that he was not doing proper work. But after seeing his abilities during the joint trial of the 3 law departments, no one in the Ministry of Justice dared to look down on him. They only silently criticized him for his neglect of official duties. But suddenly, one day, Yang Fan and Yang Longzhong began to go to the yamen on time. Not only did they go to the yamen, but like Pai Erding, Qindong, and the others, he always came a bit earlier than the petty officials. When the yamen was dismissed, he deliberately left a bit later. It was as if he had suddenly assimilated into the most common lifestyle of the officials in the Ministry of Justice. After the great victory in the battle of the 3 law departments, Yang Fan suddenly handed over all the affairs of the Ministry of Justice to Qindong and became a hands-off shopkeeper. This matter had once caused widespread discussion in the Ministry of Justice. No one knew what special intentions Yang Fan had in doing this. It was not until a long time later that everyone believed that Yang Fan was truly slacking off in his duties. All kinds of strange speculations finally died down. Now, Yang Fan suddenly became especially dedicated to his work. Every day he would arrive at the yamen early to do his work, and every day he would leave a bit later than the petty officials. Moreover, he began to study the law with Qindong, learn how to handle all kinds of official cases, and learn from the more representative cases of the past. These abnormal actions once again caused everyone to speculate. In reality, those in high positions or those with too great of a reputation were always like this. Even if it was an unintentional action, it would be used as a topic of conversation by those who were so bored that they had nothing else to do but talk about nonsense. They were so ordinary that they had no sense of existence other than talking about important people or famous people. The people in the Ministry of Justice discussed Yang Fan's abnormal actions, but very few people noticed that there was an additional servant at his side. Qindong had an attendant at his side. Most of the officials in the Ministry of Justice with the rank of vice minister and above had an attendant at their side. Some of these attendants were clever and useful petty officials from the yamen, while others were page boys that the officials were used to since they were young. The attendant was naturally the official's trusted aide. Yang Fan was a new official, so he needed a useful person by his side. This manservant looked to be only 15 or 16 years old. She looked sweet and cute, and she was well-educated and well-mannered. She also had good handwriting. The people in the Ministry of Justice, especially the people in Dr. Chen's room, all thought at first that this manservant was a member of Yang Longzhong's family that he was used to ordering around. Later, when they saw that he stayed in the detention room at night, they guessed that he was some distant relative of Yang Fan's or someone recommended by a close friend. Because of this, there was naturally no one who would seek trouble and ask Yang Fan what relationship he had with the servant. The people from the other yamens were even less likely to pay attention to this matter, seeing that the people of the Ministry of Justice were calm and collected about the sudden appearance of this handsome manservant. They began to imagine the origins of this manservant. No one was surprised by this. This attendant was naturally Tineno. Tineno was originally not that old, and after a girl disguised as a man, she looked especially young. Therefore, in everyone's eyes, she became a 15 or 16-year-old handsome young man at most. Of course, Anu used her superb disguise skills to make some changes to herself. Otherwise, with her gentle and charming appearance, even with Zhang Changzong's beauty as a model, very few people would think that she was a man. Tineno wanted to hide far away, but how could Yang Fan agree? Moreover, Tineno was only saying it casually. She didn't know how much young Master Jiang already knew, and whether or not he would harm Yang Fan. If she really wanted to leave now, she wouldn't feel at ease. However, she was also unwilling to live in Yang Fan's house. It wasn't because she was still angry at Yang Fan, but because they only guessed that young Master Jiang might already know that she was still alive. However, they couldn't rule out the possibility that Situ Liang discovered something and didn't have time to report to young Master Jiang. If she lived in the Yang family, wouldn't that be the same as exposing herself? Therefore, Yang Fan suddenly had an idea and suggested that she live in the Ministry of Justice's yamen. No matter how smart young Master Jiang was, it wouldn't be easy for him to think that after Tineno and Yang Fan reunited, she didn't live in his house, but instead found a job in the yamen as a girl. Right now, Tineno was right under Yang Fan's eyes, but she was in a state of under the light, which made it easier for her to hide her tracks. Therefore, there was one more servant in the Ministry of Justice, a very likable but not eye-catching servant. Hee, you don't say. I originally thought that the law was incomparably boring, and I didn't know how much of a headache it would be to learn it. I didn't expect these cases to be quite interesting, and I read them with great interest. Yang Fan held a file and said to Tineno with a smile, "There's nothing Anu doesn't know. There's nothing Anu isn't proficient in. I wonder how much you know about the law." Tineno was dressed like a servant in green clothes and a small hat. However, there was no one else in the room right now, so she wasn't as respectful towards Yang Fan. Her black and white eyes glared at him, and she snorted coldly. "I'm just temporarily hiding here. Don't smile at me. I didn't agree to just like that." Yang Fan winked at her mischievously and said with a smile, "Just like what?" Tineno turned her head away in annoyance and said, "I don't know." Yang Fan giggled and said, "What matter don't you know?" Tineno said in annoyance, "You think I'm a nosy person. Why would I study the law? I don't know what the law you're talking about is." Yang Fan flirted with her for a while, and seeing that she was deliberately changing the topic, he felt great in his heart. He couldn't help but chuckle, and returned to the main topic and said, "Oh, this is a case from a few years ago. Look at this case. It was said that A and B were on the same boat, but the boat was halfway through when it encountered a storm and sank. At this time, A and B both fell into the water, and there was a piece of wood floating in the water, half floating and half sinking. Both of them snatched this piece of wood, but this piece of wood couldn't support both of them, and if both of them lay on the piece of wood, it was very likely that both of them would drown. A was strong, and B was weak, so A relied on his strength to snatch the piece of wood." Tineno heard a little interest and asked, "What happened after that?" Yang Fan said, "Of course, B drowned and A was saved." Tineno pouted and said, "That's it? What's the point of this?" Yang Fan said, "The interesting thing came later. The process of these two people falling into the water and fighting over the piece of wood was seen by someone on the shore. After the deceased's wife found out, she sued the court, saying that her husband was killed by A and wanted A to pay with his life. She said that if A didn't fight over the piece of wood, her husband might not have died, and it was because A pushed her husband away that caused his death." Tineno thought about it and said, "That seems to make sense. Speaking of which, this B died in the hands of A." Yang Fan spread out his hands and said, "That's right. But it wasn't A's fault that they fell into the water. It was a natural disaster. As for the piece of wood, it was both of them who snatched it at the same time. If A gave the piece of wood to B, then he himself would drown. If he and B each held one end of the piece of wood, and neither of them let go, then both of them might drown. A also felt wronged, and he argued to the official that he couldn't give the piece of wood to him, and that he should die by himself. I also have a wife and children at home that I need to take care of. If I didn't push him away, he would still die, and I would also die. That would be 2 lives. It's true that I pushed him away, but whether I pushed him or not, he would still die. Why should I be blamed for it?" Tin Eno heard this and said, "I used to think that deciding a case was very simple. If he was guilty, then he was guilty, and if he wasn't guilty, then he wasn't guilty. I didn't think that there would be such a head-scratching case in this world. It turns out that being a judge isn't easy. So how was the case decided in the end?" Yang Fan originally wanted to tease her, and seeing that she was also interested, he was about to explain to her how Dr. Chin had originally decided this case when suddenly there was a clamor outside. He didn't know what was going on, but it caused the scribes and petty officials of this department to make a ruckus together. Yang Fan frowned and put down the file. He gestured to Tin Eno and walked out of the recording room. Standing at the door, he cleared his throat, and pretending to be dignified, he asked, "Why are you all making a ruckus?" Luo Ling hurried over to Yang Fan and mysteriously said, "Dr. Chun might not know, but this Yaman's assistant minister Chui has been promoted to prime minister." "Oh, assistant minister Chui has become prime minister?" Yang Fan was immediately startled when he heard this. The prime minister was admittedly awe-inspiring, but now Li Xiaoda's power was growing day by day. Su Wei and the other prime ministers all had to listen to him, and the political affairs hall had already become Li Xiaoda's place. Assistant Minister Chui had been promoted to prime minister, but he was ranked last among the prime ministers. His real power was much less than the current official of the Ministry of Justice. Was this a promotion on the surface, but a demotion on the inside? Luo Ling said, "That's right, the court has just issued an edict. Sibin official Do Lu Qinwang will be transferred to the position of Minister of Justice, and the left admonishing official Tao Wenju will be transferred to the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice. Haha, our position of Minister of Justice has been vacant for a long time, and now the Emperor has suddenly assigned both the Minister and Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice. It seems that our Ministry of Justice will be heavily used in the Emperor's eyes." Luo Ling spoke with his head held high. Chui Yuanzong and his master, Qin Dong, were old enemies. Chui Yuanzong was transferred away. Of course, he was happy. In addition, the Ministry of Justice previously had Chui Yuanzong, who was the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, as well as acting as the Minister of Justice. When the 3 departments of justice were put together, they all had their own official positions, but the Ministry of Justice had the second-in-command acting as the chief. Imperceptibly, their positions were half a level lower. Now that the Emperor had assigned both the Minister of Justice and the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, it was clear that the Ministry of Justice, which was once the most important in the Emperor's eyes, had once again become important. Yang Fan thought to himself, "This transfer, could it be Taiping's doing? I didn't expect her to really have a way." Yang Fan thought for a moment, then said to Luo Ling, "In that case, we should go congratulate Assistant Minister Chui on his promotion. Is Assistant Minister in the Yamen?" Luo Ling replied, "Assistant Minister Chui has entered the palace. Presumably, the Emperor has other instructions for him." Yang Fan made a sound of acknowledgement and said, "I know. When Assistant Minister Chui returns to the Yamen, let me know. This official and Minister Chen will go together to congratulate him." After Yang Fan finished speaking, he turned around and returned to the signing room. When the people at the door saw that Yang Fan had not revealed any expression of surprise from beginning to end, they couldn't help but start whispering. Someone said, "Looking at Yang Longzhong's appearance, it seems like he already knew about Assistant Minister Chui's promotion. Looking at his expression, just now, it doesn't seem like he just heard. Luo Ling's master, Qindong, was now on the same side as Yang Fan. Luo Ling, who had once viewed Yang Fan as an enemy, now naturally had to protect Yang Fan. When he heard this, his expression tightened and he hurriedly said, "Nonsense! How could Yang Longjong have known about the appointment from above? This is called staying calm in the face of danger. This is shrewdness, understand?" Chapter 455. It was not unreasonable for Luo Ling to be so nervous. Once it was confirmed that Yang Fan knew about this beforehand, it would be detrimental to Yang Fan if word got out. In every yamen of the imperial court, there was a board with the words honest, prudent, and diligent written on it. This was to remind the officials to act according to these words. The word honest naturally referred to incorruptible, and diligent referred to diligence. Then what was prudent? It was prudence and secrecy. Years ago, there was a time when Emperor Qin climbed the mountain to relax and saw Prime Minister Li Si's convoy passing by. The scale was too grand, and Emperor Qin was very dissatisfied and complained. A few days later, he saw Li Si's convoy again and found that it had been reduced. Emperor Qin was immediately alerted that someone had reported to Li Si. He conducted an investigation and did not find out who the informant was. He killed all the eunuchs at the scene. During the reign of Emperor Yuan of Han, someone reported that a county magistrate had killed innocent people. Before the emperor could decide how to investigate, the county magistrate submitted a memorial to defend himself. The emperor immediately found out that someone in court had leaked the information. Once it was verified, it was the deputy prime minister of the imperial censor who had leaked the information to the county magistrate. The emperor immediately ordered that the deputy prime minister of the imperial censor be removed from his post, investigated, and imprisoned. Ever since the Wei, Jin, and Northern and Southern dynasties, the requirements for leaking decrees were even stricter. Once a decree of the imperial court was leaked, the lightest punishment would be dismissal from office, regardless of how serious the leak was. For some cautious officials who entered the palace for the first time to meet the emperor or handle official matters, when they came out, their relatives and elders would ask them what species of trees were planted in front of the palace steps. They would resolutely refuse to answer. For major events like the promotion of the prime minister and the appointment of the minister of justice, if the emperor had not issued an edict and Yang Fan knew about it, it was obvious that someone had leaked it. Once the emperor found out and investigated, it would be a serious matter. Luo Ling knew the severity of this and hurriedly refuted. However, although the punishment for leaking government decrees was strict, there would always be people who leaked government decrees every year. Those who were well informed and could know the news one step ahead of the others would also become people who could reach the heavens in the officialdom, and they would be respected by others. Luo Ling's rebuttal made everyone even more certain that Yang Fan had long known the news. Someone had already come to a sudden realization. "I knew it. No wonder Yang Longjong has been acting out of character recently. He has been working at the yamen punctually every day and has been studying the law diligently. I'm afraid he already knew that the head of the Ministry of Justice was going to be replaced. So he deliberately put on a good show. Yeah, looks like Yang Longjong already knew about it. I say, don't talk nonsense. What level is this? This is a transfer of officials of the Prime Minister and Minister rank. Didn't you see Assistant Minister Chui's shocked expression when he received the edict from the palace to summon him in? Even he didn't know about it beforehand. So how could Dr. Yang know about it first? Nonsense. That's why I said he's capable. Have you forgotten about Princess Taiping? Sure. Be quiet, disperse, disperse, disperse. Do what you need to do. Don't talk nonsense here. Some of the more experienced officials realized that they were getting more and more out of line and hurriedly spoke up to stop them. The discussion at the door was heard by Yang Fan, who had already walked in. Tin Ano, who had followed him out, also heard it. Tin Ano followed Yang Fan back into the inner chamber with a faint smile on his face. Yang Fan couldn't help but explain, I really have nothing to do with her. Tin Eno curled his lips and said sourly, It doesn't matter if you have something to do with her. You don't need to tell me about this. Once a woman gets jealous, they would be unreasonable. Yang Fan tactfully put down the topic. He rubbed his nose and said thoughtfully, Chui Yuanzong will be transferred to the government hall to be the prime minister. Do Lu Qinwang will be the minister of justice, and Tao Wenjie will be the assistant minister of justice. It seems that my days of leisure are coming to an end. A war is about to start. Tin Eno sat down on the edge of the Kong and pulled out a sharp knife from his boot. He tested the sharpness of the blade and carefully inserted it back. He muttered to himself, Starting a war isn't scary. What's scary is waiting for a war every day and not knowing when your enemy will make a move. Situ Liang is missing. Young Master Jiang lightly paced around the small building with his brows tightly locked. He asked suspiciously, Why would Situ Liang disappear for no reason? Lu Bo said, Young Master, could it be Shenmu's people playing tricks? Young Master Jiang shook his head and said, No, the person Shenmu wants to defeat is me. There's no need for him to do such a senseless thing. Lu Bo said, This little thief is sinister and cunning. There is no dirty trick that he can't use. Young Master has overestimated him. Young Master Jiang shook his head and said, He has no choice but to use those cunning tricks on you. He doesn't have an expert like you under him. Could it be that, in order to show off his indifferent heroism, he will not do anything and wait for you to come and kill him? However, this matter is definitely not because of him. I have fought with him for so long, and I know his character too well. Even if he sends people to Luoyang, the person he wants to kill can only be me or you, and not Situ Liang. Lu Bo's white brows furrowed and said, But if it wasn't like that, what else could happen to Situ Liang? Who can do anything to him? Young Master Jiang also furrowed his brows. He couldn't understand Situ Liang's disappearance, no matter how much he thought about it. However, he couldn't think of where Situ Liang went or what he did. From the start, Situ Liang was like a loyal and devoted guard dog. He was loyal to his master, and no matter what his master did to that woman, he could only silently watch and didn't dare to express his feelings. However, if others dared to bully or hurt that woman, he would immediately bare his teeth and let out a terrifying roar. When Situ Liang was in the carriage, he had once suggested to him whether or not to kill Yang Fan to vent Tin Eno's anger. However, this matter had long been forgotten by him. Even if he remembered it, it was very difficult for him to connect this matter with Yang Fan. This was because he never thought that a dog that obeyed orders would also have feelings that belonged to him and would also have a time when he made his own decision. At this moment, Situ Liang had already become a corpse under the yellow soil of the desolate forest. His body was being devoured by insects and mosquitoes. From the beginning to the end, his master did not know that he once had feelings, and the woman that he deeply loved also did not know. We need to continue to investigate Situ Liang's information, and we need to be more secretive about our whereabouts. When our people arrive one after another, we will move out of the princess palace and find another secret place to stay. Young Master Jiang muttered to himself and made a decision. Our various plans cannot be stopped because of Situ Liang's disappearance. Quickly arrange for me to meet with that Zhang Yiji. The Assistant Minister of Justice, Chui Yuanzong, was promoted to the Prime Minister. To Chui Yuanzong, this result was something that he was happy to accept. Although the Political Affairs Hall was currently controlled by Li Zhaoda, the Prime Minister was still one level higher than the Minister of Justice. Only by being the Prime Minister in one's life could one be considered as an extremely high official. In the future, even if it was written in the family tree, it would still be an honor worthy of being respected by future generations. Furthermore, this great Zhou's Political Affairs Hall, Chui Yuanzong sneered in his heart. This great Zhou dynasty's prime minister is simply more diligent than the chives that are harvested from the fields. Today's Li Zhaoda is so glorious. Will he not have bad luck one day? At that time, he might even have the chance to become a prime minister. Today's chief official, Li Zhaoda, wasn't he also a junior in the political affairs hall? As for the fact that the great Zhou dynasty's prime minister changing so frequently, it also meant danger to him. But Cui Yuanzong didn't take it to heart. Any official would work hard like the waves of the ocean. As for how miserable the fate of those seniors who fell on the beach was, they instinctively ignored it. All the officials felt that he would be an exception. Cui Yuanzong was satisfied and happily went to the political affairs hall. The new Minister of Justice, Lu Qinhuang, and the new Assistant Minister of Justice, Tao Wenjie, also took up their posts. On the first day that the two officials took up their posts, they first met with all the officials in the Yamen. On the second day, they held a small 3-person meeting with Yang Fan. In the third courtyard of the Ministry of Justice's Yamen, there was a quiet and elegant courtyard on the right. This courtyard was where Cui Yuanzong's study used to be. The courtyard was very quiet. The mina that had been hanging in the corridor had already left the Ministry of Justice with Cui Yuanzong, who had just been promoted to Prime Minister. Only the marks left by the birdcage on the wooden frame were still impressively visible. There were people standing guard in front of the courtyard door. In the study sat Lu Qinhuang, Tao Wenjie, and Yang Fan. Lu Qinhuang was a very good talker. When he spoke, he was smooth and did not let anything slip. After all, he had been an official for so many years and often had conversations with the chiefs of the 4 barbarians and envoys from various countries. As a result, his words were very beautiful. The 3 of them were not familiar with each other, but under his leadership, the 3 of them quickly became familiar as if they were old friends. The atmosphere in the study also quickly became harmonious. The former left remonstrant official Tao Wenjie's personality was very different from Lu Qinhuang's. This person was serious in speech and manner and was not good with words. However, his words were always meaningful and his thinking was meticulous. This kind of personality had something to do with his many years of remonstrant work. The imperial messengers of the imperial censorate supervised the officials, and the remonstrant official supervised the emperor. He was specifically responsible for giving opinions on the emperor's words and actions. This official was very strange. It was insignificant, yet incomparably important. Other than his mouth, he had no authority at all. However, his authority could be greater than anyone else's. All of this depended on whether or not the emperor was willing to listen to his opinions. Wei Zheng had been the remonstrant official in the past. Compared to the senior, Tao Wenjie was naturally much inferior. In the eyes of the Ministry of Justice, these 2 officials were both newly appointed officials. Of the original officials in the Ministry of Justice, the authority of the Ministry of Justice was the most important. Yang Fan was the left minister of the Ministry of Justice. Aside from these 2, he was the most respected official in the Ministry of Justice, so it was normal for him to be summoned to understand the situation in the Yamen. However, no one could have expected that the first, second, and third leaders of the Ministry of Justice's Yamen would discuss matters that were not at all what they had imagined. If the matters these 3 were to discuss were to be leaked, it would be enough to cause great waves in the great Zhou officialdom. Chapter 456. Dou, Lu Qinhuang, Tao Wenjie, and Yang Fan were discussing how to completely destroy the ruthless group of officials gathered at the censorate. Among these 3 people, Yang Fan and Tao Wenjie were on Princess Taiping's side, while Dou Lu Qinhuang was on Li Zhaoda's side. Li Zhaoda and Princess Taiping both wanted to destroy the censorate, a powerful enemy that had been working hard to kill hundreds of officials and attack the royalists for many years. Dou Lu Qinhuang and Tao Wenjie had already received their master signal, so the discussion between the 3 went very smoothly. This meeting was actually a detailed division of labor based on Li Zhaoda and Princess Taiping's instructions. The result of the discussion was that in the future, Dou Lu Qinhuang would use his eloquence to smooth things over, play the good guy, and push the Tai Chi. Tao Wenjie would be responsible for drawing up the specific strategy and action plan to attack the censorate. As for Yang Fan would naturally be the chief thug of the Ministry of Justice, the double flower red rod. Well, in Do Lu Qinhuang's words, Yang Fan was the vanguard of the fight against evil, the nemesis of evil. Those who were chosen by Princess Taiping naturally had extraordinary skills. Tao Wenjie quickly drew up a meticulous, detailed, and comprehensive plan to attack the censorate. Many of the methods in this plan were similar to the methods Lai Junqin had used to collect evidence and attack the officials. It should be known that the methods listed in Lai Junqin's weaving scripture were not imagined out of thin air. They were examples of the censorate collecting evidence and attacking their political enemies. Lai Junqin had only compiled them into a book. At the same time, Yang Fan also learned from Zhao Yu that young Master Jiang had suffered a great loss in Chang. His many years of foundation in Chang and had all fallen into Shenmu's hands. At this time, he had already moved to Luoyang, determined to rise again there. In other words, young Master Jiang would be stationed in Luoyang. Because of this, Tin Ano did not dare to hide anything from Yang Fan. She told Yang Fan everything she knew about young Master Jiang. After learning how powerful young Master Jiang was, Yang Fan became cautious. Of course, in view of young Master Jiang's power, it was unlikely that he would openly go against the government. The one he was most afraid of was still Liu Boyan, who was said to be much more intelligent than Situ Liang. However, ever since Situ Liang inexplicably appeared, young Master Jiang didn't make any moves, and Yang Fan could only bide his time. At the moment, Anu was hiding in the yamen of the Ministry of Justice and spending time with him. This feeling was extraordinarily sweet. Whether it was Yang Fan or Tin Ano, they were not in a hurry to change this relationship. This kind of relationship was very special. There was both sweetness and ambiguity, but it was completely different from that of a wife or a lover. Mixed in between love and ambiguity was their working relationship. Yang Fan and Xiao Man had also worked together in the palace before, but now that Anu's identity was Yang Fan's attendant, the feeling was different. In these days, the relationship between the two had gradually recovered. Now, it was the powerful pressure from young Master Jiang that had become a powerful force that prevented them from joining together. Yang Fan did not know what plans young Master Jiang had for coming to Luoyang, nor did he know how much power he had hidden in Luoyang. He could only deal with the changes by not changing. However, on the other hand, after Tao Wenjie's plan was drawn up, there were difficulties in carrying it out. In order to encircle and annihilate a group of powers, they had to take into account the time, location, people, and other factors. It was close to the end of the year. For the people of China, the New Year was a very important holiday. It was not a suitable time to encircle and annihilate the censorate. Once they did so, the efficiency of the various yamen would slow down due to the New Year. This would give the censorate ample time to react. Do Lu Qinhuang, Tao Wenjie, and Yang Fan had yet to come to a decision on whether to attack before the New Year or after the New Year. However, an accident caused them to completely give up on the plan to attack the censorate before the New Year. This accident was the triumphant return of Master Xue Huai. Xue Huai did not fight. This friend of his was truly a lucky general. He led the army to the western regions in a grandiose manner. However, he was only halfway there when he stopped advancing. This was because his opponent had disappeared again, just like last time. Mo Duo, who led the army to invade Spiritual State, did not know whether it was because of some internal changes, or because he heard that the great Zhou dynasty had sent out 200,000 soldiers, and thought that it would be too risky for him to go deep into the desert alone. In any case, he retreated. Since he retreated to the Great Prairie, Xue Huai naturally had no more battles to fight. Xue Huai would not ask for trouble by going deep into the desert and initiating an attack. For a long time, the Great Prairie had been a natural moat set up by the heavens to help the nomadic people against the farming people. The farming people rarely had the ability to send armies deep into the desert. Before the invention of the stirrup, the Xiongnu cavalry was not as powerful as the people of the Great Prairie. When Emperor Wu of Han attacked the Xiongnu, his country was almost destroyed. Today, Wu Zetian was no match for Emperor Wu of Han, and today, Xue Huai was no match for Wei Qing and Hu Zubing. Therefore, just as Li Zhaoda said when he was bidding farewell to Xue Huai succeeded when the horse arrived. In fact, he succeeded before the horse even arrived. Without firing a single arrow, Xue Huai had made a great contribution. Excitedly, Xue Huai reported to the imperial court, "Mo Duo fled as soon as he heard my name. I beg your majesty to allow me to return to the imperial court." Xue Huai's return to the imperial court would not have any effect on the Ministry of Penalties' plan to encircle and annihilate the imperial envoy station. However, after the news of Xue Huai's great victory reached Luoyang, Empress Wu Zetian suddenly had an idea. She thought that since the army had already set out, there was no need for them to go back and forth and waste resources. It was better to have the army continue the campaign, but change the target to recapture the 4 towns of Anqi. After several years of preparation, the imperial court had made preparations to recapture the 4 towns of Anqi in terms of supplies, armor, arrows, and training of soldiers. If not for the sudden invasion of the Turks, Wu Zetian would have also planned to use the army. She had planned to send troops to recapture the 4 towns of Anqi after the end of the year, but now she was simply taking advantage of the situation and pushing the plan forward by a few months. Because of this matter, the imperial court once more engaged in a fierce debate. Some agreed to send troops. Others believed that the original plan should be carried out, and still others opposed the expedition. All sides had differing opinions. This was clearly not the time for the Ministry of Penalty to attack the imperial censorate. The imperial court had no time to devote its attention to matters of state and military affairs. Dou Lu, Qin Wang, Tao Wenjie, and Yang Fan discussed the matter and decided to put the plan on hold until the dispute in the court was over. After another round of heated debate, Wu Zetian herself was in favor of the expedition, so the opinions gradually reached a consensus, and they agreed to send troops. But the funds and provisions they had originally been raised to attack the Turks and recapture Lingzhou had been changed to an expedition to the 4 towns of Anqi, and it was also the end of the year, so the finances were somewhat tight. Dou Lu Qin Wang impatiently proposed to the emperor that all officials of the Great Zhou above the 9th rank should contribute 2 months' worth of their salaries to the army. Wu Zetian was somewhat tempted, but there was no precedent for this. So she first released this news to test the reactions of the officials. As expected, this matter had aroused the dissatisfaction of the officials. Dou Lu Qin Wang wanted to express his support for the emperor and show off his noble character and unquestionable integrity as an official. But if he took the limelight, it would only be a loss to others. There were some officials who did not work outside and relied entirely on their salaries to maintain their relatively decent lives. Contributing 2 months' worth of salary was not something they could bear. For example, the supervising imperial censor Wang Chuli had only been transferred to the imperial censorate after Lai Junqin, and the other officials of the imperial censorate had been killed, demoted, or exiled. This imperial censor was rather incorruptible, and his family did not have much savings. If 2 months' worth of salary were deducted, he would not be able to bear it. As a result, this imperial censor immediately wrote a righteous and stern impeachment memorial, quoting the classics to refute Dou Lu Qin Wang's absurd claims. A large number of officials responded to Wang Chuli's rebuttal. Seeing that the backlash was too strong, Wu Zetian could only give up on this plan. At this time, Wu Sanxi was still busy with the construction of the heavenly pivot. The craftsmen of the 3 Palace and Xingtai Palace were already on their way to the construction site, cleaning up the ground, drawing up the blueprints, and purchasing the bricks and wood. These 3 projects were extremely costly, but no one suggested halting the construction in order to provide for the army. Wu Zetian herself seemed to have intentionally or unintentionally ignored it. In the end, the military expenditure problem was solved by the Ministry of Revenue. The method they used was nothing more than living beyond one's means. Great General Shui Huai received the emperor's decree and retired, returning to the imperial court. Meanwhile, the army continued to advance westward. The imperial court appointed Great General Wang Xiaojie, who was familiar with the situation in the western regions, to be the commander-in-chief. The war to reclaim the 4 garrisons of Anqi officially began. Wang Xiaojie was appointed as the chief steward of the martial might army. He was travel-worn as he chased after his expeditionary army. At this time, Luoyang City had already ushered in the New Year's Day. This year's New Year's Day was November 1st. During the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties, the Xia dynasty used the first day of the first lunar month as New Year's Day. At that time, New Year's Day and Spring Festival were on the same day. The Shang dynasty used the first day of the 12th month as its New Year's Day, while the Zhou dynasty used the first day of the 11th month as its New Year's Day. After Qin Shi Huang Yingzheng unified the world, he thought that his achievements were not inferior to the ancient emperors. So he came up with an ingenious idea to make the first day of the 10th month as New Year's Day. From then on, the New Year's Day of each dynasty was based on the calendar established by the first unified dynasty of China, the Xia dynasty, with the first day of the first month as the New Year's Day. However, after Wu Zetian established the Great Zhou dynasty, everything followed the rules of the Zhou dynasty. As a result, New Year's Day became November 1st. A new beginning, everything was renewed. On New Year's Day, the emperor would lead the civil and military officials in offering sacrifices to the heavens and the earth. Wu Zetian gathered all the officials of the 5th rank and above in the Wanxiang Divine Palace to hold a grand ceremony to offer sacrifices to the heavens and the earth. Wu Zetian was dressed in a black imperial robe decorated with 12 emblems. She was also wearing a knee covering, a leather belt, a large belt, and many other accessories. She wore a crown on her head, and the 12 rows of crowns studded with precious jewels covered her aged face, making her seem even more dignified. Yang Fan was a 5th rank official, and he happened to be one of the officials qualified to participate in the ceremony to the heavens and the earth. He was also dressed in a solemn ceremonial robe. The entire Wanxiang Divine Palace was filled with a dense mass of people. Following the loud chanting of the great Honglu, they prostrated themselves in worship to the heavens and the earth, listening to Wu Zetian recite the prayers to the heavens and the earth. After the emperor's first offering, it was the crown prince's turn. However, after Wu Zetian recited the prayers to the heavens and stepped to the side, an unexpected scene occurred. Chapter 457. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, the Dahonglu walked towards Wu Qingxi. Wu Qingxi was clearly prepared for this. There was no surprise on his face. Perhaps he had already rehearsed the ritual procedure of offering to heaven and earth under the arrangement of the Ministry of Rites. He walked steadily under the guidance of the Dahonglu and walked forward step by step from the civil and military officials and the members of the imperial family. If Wu Qingxi was to be the offering, then what about the crown prince? Even though this was a solemn hall, there was still a buzzing sound in the Wanxiang Divine Palace. No one dared to whisper in this place at this time. This was an instinctive reaction of surprise. The heavy breathing of more than 1,000 officials gathered together to form a wave of air. Princess Taiping's face suddenly paled. She hurriedly lowered her head to hide her shocked and frightened expression. Yang Fan was a 5th rank official. The lowest rank of the officials qualified to attend the offering was 5th rank, so he stood in the last row. This unexpected scene caused his eyes to widen. He looked up at the hall, and his excellent eyesight allowed him to see Wu Zetian's face clearly. But he could only see the 12 rows of coronets hanging in front of Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian stood steadily. The 12 strings of pearls and jade hanging in front of her were like a dense curtain that completely covered her face. Yang Fan noticed that the coronets were hanging quietly and motionlessly. Perhaps Wu Zetian, who was behind the coronets, was using her sharp old eyes to scan the reactions of the officials? Yang Fan took a deep breath and suppressed the shock in his heart. He also lowered his head. Is the Empress publicly announcing to the officials and to the world that she wants to change heirs? Or, right, there is still the final offering. Could it be the Empress wants the Crown Prince to be the final offering? A glimmer of hope suddenly appeared in Yang Fan's heart. The officials also thought of this. After the offering ended, they quietly raised their heads a little. This movement of raising their heads was very slight, but when countless people did the same movement at the same time, even the slightest movement was spectacular enough. The civil and military officials, as well as the members of the royal family, seemed to be led by an invisible thread. After Wu Qingxi retreated, they all raised their heads in unison. Wu Zetian, who was standing high above the alchemy emperor, slightly raised the corner of her mouth, revealing a cold smile. After Wu Qingxi retreated, the Dahonglu walked forward again and began to guide the person in charge of the final offering. On the spacious and large Wanxiang Divine Palace, which could be said to be the largest palace in the world, countless pairs of eyes followed his figure and moved. Everyone held their breath to see who he was walking towards. The Dahonglu walked step by step and finally reached Liang Wanggu Sanxi's side. The officials in the court were all dumbfounded. Following the guidance of the solemn Dahonglu, Wu Sanxi took large strides and ascended the Pill Emperor. When Wu Sanxi's clear voice echoed in the Golden Palace, no one looked at him and no one listened to what he said. When Wu Sanxi made the final offering ceremony, the civil and military officials all looked at Wu Zetian's son, at the former emperor of the Tang dynasty, the current crown prince of the Zhou dynasty, Li Dan. Some of the people standing at the back could see his back, while others could only follow the direction in which the others were looking. They couldn't see his existence at all. However, the people standing beside Li Dan could see him. Li Dan's expression was calm, and there was nothing strange. His throne had been taken away by his mother. The two concubines who had accompanied him day and night and gone through trials and tribulations with him had been beaten to death by his mother. Now he was being humiliated in front of everyone, and his position as crown prince was about to be lost. But Li Dan's face didn't show any anger or emotion. Instead, it was the faces of the young princes behind him that were flushed with anger. The sacrificial ceremony was not just a ceremony. It was a clear political signal. Back then, when the indulgent Ado ascended to the throne, he announced to the world, "The Gu family will govern. The sacrificial ceremony will be done by me." Even someone like Ado knew that some things had to be in his hands. He could hand over all the affairs of Shu Han to Zhuge Liang, no matter how big or small. But the matter of the sacrificial ceremony to heaven and earth, he had to make it clear in the succession edict. This was his right, and others couldn't touch it. Even if he controlled all the affairs, he was only a minister and not the ruler of a country. But the sacrificial ceremony to heaven and earth was different. This was the symbol of a ruler's power. With the end of the ceremony, the civil and military officials, as well as the members of the royal family, retreated. Once they exited the myriad deity palace, they hurriedly walked out. Today's ceremony had revealed too much information to them. They needed to go back and digest it properly. For a time, they didn't even talk to each other. The crown prince's family was the most awkward in this crowd. Ever since the emperor decreed that the crown prince was not allowed to see the officials, his family had actually been placed under house arrest in the crown prince's palace. Other than the servants by his side, no one else could see them. And today, even though they were surrounded by so many officials and members of the royal family, they still felt extremely lonely. Everyone avoided coming into contact with them. When they saw the crown prince and his family walk over, they all lowered their eyes and quickened their steps to avoid them. Li Dan's expression was still calm, but his sons walking behind him were filled with grief and indignation. Li Qingqi and Li Longji were especially agitated. Li Dan had to reprimand them in a low voice and order them to restrain themselves. At this moment, Princess Taiping walked towards Li Dan. Some of the officials saw this, but the only thing they could do was to lower their heads even more and walk even faster, as if they did not see anything. As for the Wu nephews and those who had already sided with the Wu clan, they sneered with disdain. No one knew what the siblings were talking about. They stood on the spacious ground in front of the Wanxiang Divine Palace for a long time. Li Dan cupped his fists at his sister and turned to walk towards the Crown Prince's palace. Yang Fan was the first batch of officials to leave the Grand Hall. However, he had to let the higher-ranked officials leave first. Hence, he was the last batch of officials to leave. When he reached the side of Princess Taiping and Li Dan, he did not walk past them hurriedly like those officials who avoided the Crown Prince's family as though they were snakes or scorpions. Instead, he paused for a moment. Li Longji saw him, and his eyes were fixed on his face. Yang Fan stopped and cupped his fists at him. This is a form of etiquette. Since he has already met this Prince of Linzi, it is only right for him to pay his respects. However, in the entire imperial court, after the heaven offering ceremony, only Yang Fan remained to pay his respects. Li Longji did not reveal any expression of joy. He recognized Yang Fan. In his memory, this Yang Fan has a close relationship with the Wu family. Li Longji bit his lips and turned his head away coldly. Yang Fan sighed in his heart and slowly walked past them. Li Dan led his sons towards the Crown Prince's palace, while Princess Taiping walked out of the palace gates and soon caught up with Yang Fan. In front of Li Dan, Princess Taiping appeared calm and composed. But after parting ways with Li Dan, her face was strangely pale. Looking at her erratic eyes, she seemed to be in a trance. When crossing the Golden Water Bridge, Princess Taiping tripped and fell forward with an ayah. "Princess, be careful." Yang Fan shot to Princess Taiping's side and stretched out his hand to support her. He quickly retracted his hand and cupped his hands in salute. Princess Taiping's beautiful face looked gloomily at him, and then she walked with heavy steps toward the bridge. Yang Fan hesitated for a moment, and then he followed behind her. Princess Taiping acted as if there was no one around, as if she did not see him at all. She walked out of the palace gate alone. Su Hao rushed to the carriage and put down the steps. Just when Princess Taiping was about to board the carriage, Yang Fan suddenly rushed to her side and whispered, "Your Highness!" Princess Taiping cast a glance at him and coldly asked, "Yang Langzhong, what can I do for you?" Yang Fan understood her current mood and smiled faintly. "Can I have a chat with Princess?" Princess Taiping glanced at him and plainly stated, "If you are not afraid of others gossiping, then board the carriage." Finishing her words, she took the lead and boarded the carriage. Yang Fan didn't hesitate to board the carriage. Princess Taiping entered the carriage and sat down. She couldn't help but be surprised when she saw that Yang Fan actually followed her. Yang Fan grinned and smiled with a sunny face. "Anyway, the whole world knows what is going on between you and me, although we are not like that." If it was the previous Princess Taiping, she would have bitterly corrected his words. But at this moment, Princess Taiping's heart was in a mess, and she didn't have the mood to correct him. She was silent for a moment and faintly said, "This matter is my fault. The Li clan is finished. Maybe the day the Mother Empress dies will be the day my Li clan will be wiped out by the Wu clan. I shouldn't have implicated you. I will think of a way to cut off all relations with you." Yang Fan said, "Many years ago I was a little beggar. I left my hometown and went to a very far place. In fact, I just wanted to stay away from my enemies. It would be safer this way, but I never thought that I would meet something there. If I didn't choose to go south at that time, maybe I would still be a beggar today." Princess Taiping's expression suddenly became a little strange, but Yang Fan didn't notice it. He continued to say, "Many years later, I arrived at Luoyang. If I didn't save a person by the canal, if I didn't accept her plan to go to the Luo River to play a game of football, if I didn't decide to rob the execution ground when Ma Qiao was being escorted to the execution ground, if there are many ifs, then I wouldn't be sitting here right now. Princess Taiping slightly frowned and said, "What are you trying to say?" Yang Fan said, "I want to tell you that every step of a person's life is faced with a choice. Every choice, he thinks that his decision is the most correct. In fact, before making a choice, no one will ever know whether his choice is right or wrong. Moreover, no one knows whether his choice will change again, because there are too many things that can affect it in the future." Princess Taiping sadly said, "Do I still have a choice?" Yang Fan said meaningfully, "What I am talking about now is not your choice, but His Majesty the Emperor's choice." Chapter 458. Princess Taiping repeated Yang Fan's words and gradually understood something. She raised her head and looked at Yang Fan with hope. She asked, "Do you think we still have a chance?" Yang Fan said, "You are confused because of your concern. Didn't you notice that although the Emperor chose the Wu family, he hasn't decided who it will be? There are two people in the Wu family now. One is in charge of the secondary offering, and the other is in charge of the final offering. It can be seen that the position of the crown prince can't be decided in a short time. Accidents often happen to things that have been decided, let alone things that haven't been decided yet." Princess Taiping said, "But no matter which one the Empress chooses in the end, the result will be the same for us." Yang Fan said, "Success depends half on hard work and half on God's will. Before it happens, any accident can happen. Can you imagine a beggar who didn't have clothes to wear and food to eat 10 years ago can live in the temple and become a doctor of the Ministry of Justice today?" Princess Taiping laughed, and her heavy heart relaxed a little. She joked, "You are just a doctor now. You can't live in the temple." She thought for a while and nodded. "What you said makes sense. Things that haven't been realized for a day may happen. If I give up now, it will really happen." Yang Fan said happily, "It's good that you understand. I will go back now. As for the thing that you said, you will help me clear." Yang Fan smiled bitterly and said, "Thank you for your kindness. But let's forget about this kind of thing. For things that people want to see, it's useless even if they deny it. Some things will become whiter and some things will become darker. It's better to let nature take its course." "Oh," Princess Taiping agreed. She didn't know why she felt a little relaxed. Seeing Yang Fan lift the curtain, Princess Taiping suddenly thought of something and asked, "Why can you never admit defeat? If you persist until the end and still fail, what will you do then?" Yang Fan stopped and thought for a while. He said then, "I will just leave. The world is so big, where can I go? Do I have to hang myself on this crooked tree?" Princess Taiping was speechless. Yang Fan's horse was tied to the back of Princess Taiping's carriage. Su Haoed stopped the carriage when he saw Yang Fan coming out. Yang Fan went to the back of the carriage, untied the reins, and got on the horse. Just as he was about to ride away, a clear and pleasant voice suddenly came from behind. "Tomorrow, I've asked her to go to Golden Grain Garden with me." Yang Fan suddenly turned around and saw that the curtains were gently closed. A soft hand with cardamom on it quietly retracted into the window. Yang Fan's eyes were filled with amazement. Yang Fan was surprised. There was no court meeting the next day. Early in the morning, Shangguan Wan'er was taken out of the palace by a light carriage. Wu Zetian knew Shangguan Wan'er's whereabouts. Wan'er had reported to her in advance that Princess Taiping had invited her to visit the Golden Grain Garden. Wu Zetian had thought that her daughter would be in a bad mood after the heavenly worship ceremony. She had not expected her daughter to still be in the mood to invite Shangguan Wan'er out. It seemed that her daughter's attitude had changed since she married into the Wu family. She was no longer against the Wu family's inheritance. Naturally, Wu Zetian was happy to see this happen, so she agreed. The light carriage arrived at the Princess Taiping mansion. The side door opened, and the carriage drove directly into the back garden of the Princess Taiping mansion. After another half an hour, a luxurious carriage drove out from the side door. hurrying out of the city. There were only 4 guards on the left and right side of the carriage. It was a simple carriage. It was really going out of the city. Princess Taiping's mansion in Jingu Garden was called Zizé Garden. Princess Taiping once complained to Wu Zetian that her mansion was smaller than Princess Taiping's mansion and not as gorgeous as Princess Taiping's mansion. So she opened more than a dozen shops in Nan City and asked Yang Fan to help her manage them. She wanted to earn more money. Princess Taiping's words were admittedly to help Yang Fan get off the hook, but it was not without reason. Her courtyard was indeed smaller than that of the noble princess. The noble princess courtyard occupied an area of 20 mu, while her courtyard occupied an area of at most 18 mu. Her garden was indeed not as magnificent as that of a noble princess, because there were only a few palaces and pavilions built in her garden, preserving the original ecology of this place to the greatest extent possible. So it was full of wild interest. As for the geographical location, Princess Taiping was even more careless. Her garden occupied the most beautiful section of the Golden Grain Garden. The land here was at least 5 times more expensive than the land of the noble princess's courtyard. It was the same plot of land. The name Jingu Garden came from Shi Chong, a rich man in the Western Jin dynasty. Shi Chong built a mansion here that was more elegant and magnificent than the royal garden. It was called Jingu Garden. Princess Taiping's Zizé Garden was said to be the location of the Jingu Garden built by Shi Chong. Now the mansion of other rich and powerful families was just a piece of farmland outside Jingu Garden during Shi Chong's time. Shang Guanwan lived in the palace. It was not easy for her to meet Yang Fan, but the biggest obstacle to meeting Yang Fan was the oath she made before. Now Princess Taiping followed Yang Fan's words and thought of a reason to dispel the taboo in Wan Er's heart. Yang Fan was actually very curious about what kind of excuse Princess Taiping had made up, but he didn't ask Wan Er about it. It was a very subtle feeling. When he saw Wan Er, from her slightly strange expression when she saw him, he could feel that he couldn't ask her about it. Princess Taiping did not come with them. She invited Wan Er to visit Jingu Garden to create an opportunity for Yang Fan. Of course, she would not come with them. Even if Yang Fan and Shang Guanwan did not care about her, she was here. Wouldn't she feel uncomfortable when she saw Yang Fan and Wan whispering to each other? So today, the Zizé Garden became the world of Yang Fan and Shang Guanwan. There were not too many buildings in the Zizé Garden, but some ingenious designs were made for the river that flowed through the garden. According to the height of the terrain, platforms were built and ponds were dug. The clear stream lingered, the sound of water murmuring, birds singing, and fish jumping. It was very elegant. This kind of wild scenery was more beautiful than those man-made landscapes. Occasionally, in the depths of the grass and trees, a few dilapidated stone walls could be seen, which were heavily covered by wisteria. When you got closer and looked carefully, you could see the delicate and beautiful patterns on the stones, which made the stones that had been through the vicissitudes of time maintain a sense of nobility. Therefore, the broken fences and broken walls also had a kind of simple and unadorned beauty. Wan had been here before, and she had a good memory. She knew many stories that had been buried in the piles of old books. Wan nestled in Yang Fan's arms, pointing at the stone wall in the depths of the grass and trees. She said slowly, "This used to be Shi Chong's garden. At that time there were pavilions and pavilions here, high and low, extremely gorgeous. It was said that Shi Chong used pearls, agate, rhinoceros horns, ivory, and so on to decorate this place with gold and jade. Even the toilet was decorated with embroidered curtains and cushions, burning incense, and beautiful maids waiting on them. It was to the extent that an official who came to visit thought that he had mistakenly entered Shi Chong's inner chamber. Do you see that wall? That is the remains of Shi Chong's Golden Grain Garden. Sometimes I think that this place, could it be the green bead house where the passionate green bead lady lived? Perhaps green bead lady jumped down from here and died for love. Yang Fan sighed softly and said, "Such an arrogant man of the generation, where is he now? All that's left is this broken fences and broken walls." He held Wan Oi's slender waist and looked in the direction of Mount Mang. He said, "Just like the Emperor Guangwu of Han, Lu Xiao, who is buried on the riverbank at the foot of Mount Mang. This generation of emperors, what is left of them now?" Shanghai Wana looked back and smiled. She said, "I told you about green beads, deep love. Why are you so emotional?" Yang Fan said, "You are a woman. Of course you are thinking about green beads, deep love. I am a man, but I am thinking about Shi Chang's glorious life. Especially when I think about the current dynasty struggle between Li and Wu, the struggle between Wu and Wu, I feel even more emotional." Shanghai Wana shook her head. She said, "Lang Jun is really different. Let's not talk about the emperor's family matters. Let's talk about the dynasties Chinese and Wu. Each of them is white-haired and old, but they still work hard to climb up. They know that the higher the place, the more dangerous it is, but they still refuse to give up. Lang Jun, at such a young age, you are already a fifth-grade official. It can be said that your future is limitless. Why are you so depressed?" Yang Fan smiled and said, "Although I am emotional, I am still doing it. I just think that when a person is young, maybe it is for fame and fortune, or maybe it is for ambition, they will fight hard. But when they are old, for the sake of their reputation after death, for the sake of their children, I am afraid they will be more passionate about fame and fortune than when they were young." Yang Fan gently kissed Wan Er's cheek and softly said, "We are still young. It is the time to be happy. When we have children and have something to worry about, it will not be too late to work hard for our children." When Shanghai Wan heard this, her expression immediately became gloomy. Seeing this, Yang Fan couldn't help but secretly regret his slip of the tongue. Wan was now used by the Empress and didn't have freedom. Her father's and mother's families had been persecuted because they had once opposed the Empress. Although she was only a weak woman, now her father's and mother's families had many relatives. She was like a towering tree that sheltered them from the wind and rain. She couldn't let go of these things. Even when the two of them had a tryst, it was like the cowherd and the weaver girl. They even needed Princess Taiping to build a magpie bridge for them. For a woman, the most important thing in life was to have a man she loved and to have children for this man. If she lacked either one, it would be a regret that she could never make up for in her life. Now, even a tryst was so difficult, not to mention having children. Wouldn't talking about this make her sad? Yang Fan hurriedly laughed and said, "You see, you and I have met. This is a very happy thing. Why do you have to chase after the past and think about the present and worry for the people of the past? Let's talk about the most famous legend in the Golden Grain Garden, green bead falling from the building. Green bead's loyalty and Shi Chang's deep love have been passed down through the ages, but I always feel that it is not the case." Chapter 459. When Wan heard Yang Fan talk about children, she suddenly felt sad. When would she be able to marry Yang Fan properly? Even she herself was not sure. Occasionally having a rendezvous, there was a kind of separation, makes the heart grow fonder. But in this way, she would not be able to bear children for Yang Fan. She was not young anymore. If she waited for a few more years, thinking of this, Wana was very sad. Suddenly hearing Yang Fan mention green bead falling from a building, she could not help but divert her attention. One must know that the story of green bead falling from a building had made her yearn for it endlessly when she was a young girl. That kind of undying love was both moving and moving. Shanghai Wan could not help but ask, "Lang Jun, what do you think is wrong with green bead falling from a building?" Yang Fan said, "Shi Chong regarded human life as grass and liked to show off. But when a guest came to a banquet, if the wine was not drunk, he would kill the serving maid. Once, General Wang Dun came to his manor for a banquet. Because he was not good with wine, he refused to drink. He actually killed 3 young girls. Those young girls were delicate and beautiful. They were all people who served by his side all year round. Some of them had even served him in bed and were the people who used to sleep beside him. He killed them as if they were chickens. Did he hesitate at all? Green Bead was only a singing girl. She was no different from the girls who were killed. Because she was especially beautiful, he pampered her. It would be ridiculous to say that he was deeply in love. Yang Fan pointed to the broken walls under the cover of the wisteria. He said coldly, "When people come here and think about the past, they only remember Green Bead falling from a building. Does anyone remember those innocent young girls who were killed by Shirchong like chickens? Perhaps the blood that they shed back then is under our feet." Shanghai Wenner was somewhat moved. Speaking of which, when she stood here, did she not only think of the love story of Shirchong and Green Bead? When did she think of those young girls who were brutally killed by Shirchong? This so-called deep affection had been passed down by the later generations and became like a poem or a painting. It actually made people forget what kind of blood had once been here. Yang Fan said, "Shirchong is a competitive person. I heard that the rich family used sugar water to boil the pot, so he used candles to cook. I heard that the rich family used red limestone to paint the walls, so he used pepper. When others made cloth for 40 li, he made a brocade tent for 50 li. He was never willing to fall behind." Yang Fan continued, "Where did Shirchong get his money from? Did he do business? When he was the Jingzhou provincial governor, he often sent soldiers to rob the merchants who came and went, using the officials as bandits to amass wealth. Later, he attached himself to the empress, Jia Nanfeng. With his usual style, where do you think his wealth came from? How could such a heartless bandit die so unjustly just because he lost the life of a pitiful woman? Why did he die? It was because his backer, Empress Jia, was killed by Sima Lun. Afterwards, Sima Yun attacked Sima Lun, and after his defeat, Sima Lun used this case to kill thousands of his political enemies. Shirchong was originally a member of the Jia family and was the richest in the world. If he wanted to rebel or secretly support the rebels, what would happen? How could Sima Lun not take this opportunity to get rid of him?" With a cold laugh, Yang Fan said, "But when the soldiers came to arrest him, he said to Lu Zhu, 'I am guilty because of you.' How shameless! Shameless! He was forcing Green Bead to die with him, not wanting his exclusive property to fall into the hands of others. Even if he offered Green Bead to Sima Luan's confidant, Sun Xiao, would he be spared from death? Would Sima Luan let go of such a dangerous political enemy for this reason? Green Bead died, but Shirchong, who loved her very much, refused to die. He was captured by Sima Luan and executed along with the thousands of officials who were implicated. Based on his usual demeanor, I would rather believe that he refused to hand over Green Bead because he has always been domineering. It has always been him robbing others. When has he ever allowed others to touch his exclusive property? His death has nothing to do with Green Bead. Whether or not Green Bead exists in this world, whether or not he offered Green Bead, as an official who lost his political career but was the richest in the world, his political enemies would not let him go. It is laughable that later generations deliberately ignored the story and made up such a poignant love story. What a romantic story! Those extremely idle scholars are like gossipy women who love to gossip about such things. Shanghai Wenner thought carefully. Based on Shirchong's usual conduct and the real reason why he was killed, there was no way she could refute. She could only laugh and say coquettishly, "You really don't know how to flirt. Such a beautiful and poignant love story has been reduced to such an unbearable state by you." Yang Fan said, "I am just angry that Green Bead was clearly forced to her death by Shirchong. Shirchong's death was clearly due to his political failure, but you still want to cover them with a veil of affection." At this point, Yang Fan suddenly smiled. He stuck his mouth to Shanghai Wenner's cute ear and whispered, "There is a good man by your side. Why are you envious of other people's love? Why don't we?" Yang Fan's voice became a little lower. When he whispered these words, Wan Er's face immediately turned red. She lightly hit Yang Fan and said coquettishly, "Only you can think of this. In broad daylight, in this kind of place. I don't want it." Yang Fan said, "There is no one else in this garden. Those imperial bodyguards and servants are not here. The sky is covered on the ground. How interesting." No, no. Wan Er was afraid that he would use force. She blushed and ran away. Yang Fan immediately chased after her. A moment later, there was a burst of laughter from the depths of the grass and trees. There weren't many buildings in the Zizé garden, but even though there weren't many palaces here, they made the best use of everything and made the most out of everything. For example, this magnificent giant bathroom. When Yang Fan walked in and saw the bathroom, he was stunned by its grandeur. At the beginning of its construction, this bathroom was probably surrounded by a beautiful natural landscape. Therefore, looking at the rugged mountain rocks, lush flowers and trees, and the very natural bathing pool made of stones in the middle, if it wasn't for the roof above them, they would almost think that this was a pool formed by heaven and earth. This building with a bathroom was different from an ordinary house. The entire wall on the right was filled with slanted windows. The windows were covered with silk, and the sunlight shone through the windows, bathing the flowers and plants in the gentle light. From the moment the sun rose to the moment it set, it could shine on the green, plump leaves and bright and charming flowers for an entire day. On the other side of the flowers and trees, there was a huge skylight. After the skylight was opened, the plants on that side that did not like the sun could also receive sufficient sunlight. During the rainy season, the skylight could be opened to let the rain pour down. Above the pool was a dome decorated like a cave. There was plenty of sunlight on the left and right. Being in it, it was like bathing in the open air, but it also had absolute privacy. In this spacious bathroom, there was a tall osmanthus tree. It grew in a greenhouse and was out of season. At this time, it was still blooming with flowers. The bathroom was filled with fragrance, refreshing the mind. Some petals were floating down, falling directly into the pool. As the water rippled, the water looked like it was covered with a layer of snow-white osmanthus carpet. In the white carpet of petals, there were many red and yellow petals that had fallen from other flowers and trees. Under the carpet of petals, there was mist rising in spirals. The water here was running water, and it was not artificially heated. It was a hot spring that had been enclosed in the bathroom. Looking at Yang Fan's stunned expression, Wan Er said sweetly, "What do you think? My bath is beautiful, isn't it?" Yang Fan was surprised. "Your bath?" Wan Er said, "Of course. Does Lang Jun think that this Zizé Yuan belongs to Taiping alone? Zizé Yuan covers an area of 18 mu, of which 5 mu belongs to me. It's just that my place is adjacent to hers and the place isn't big. So I didn't set up my own garden. The wall of flowers that we just passed through is the boundary. This side is already my garden." Yang Fan remembered that Xiaomeng, a palace guard, could own 3 shops in Nan City. With Shanghai Wan Er status, it was not difficult for her to buy a few mu of land in this expensive land. No wonder the style of this Zizé Yuan was so natural and simple. It was very different from other houses. It was probably all Wan Er's doing. Yang Fan said happily, "Beautiful. This place is really beautiful. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is a paradise. Such a big pool, huh? If we don't have a bath together, it will be a waste of God's gift. Wife, take off your clothes." "I don't want to. You wash first. I will go change my clothes." Wan Er twisted her waist and dodged like a fish. Yang Fan chuckled. In a moment, his clothes fell to the ground. There was a splash sound, as if a large stone had fallen into the water, splashing up a large amount of water. The hot spring water was smooth and smooth. If Yang Fan, who was lying in the water, had skin that was smooth, then it was barely enough. Shanghai Wan Er had already taken off her clothes in the small wooden house in the side room. A large white bath towel was wrapped around her body. The top revealed her smooth shoulders, the bottom revealed her delicate calves, and her slender feet were bare. Juan held a bowl of medicinal soup in her hand. She hesitated for a moment before restraining the temptation in her heart. She frowned slightly and drank the soup in mouthfuls. Today, Yang Fan's words had aroused the thought of giving birth to children for Yang Fan. Once this thought was born, it grew crazily and almost completely took over her heart. But she knew that now was not the time. Juan swallowed mouthful after mouthful of the bitter medicinal soup. She secretly vowed in her heart that she would find an opportunity. After making the proper arrangements, she would give birth to a child that belonged to them. If this wish could not be fulfilled, she would not be satisfied even if she died. The hot spring water rippled and formed a white mist. There was a layer of soft flower petals on the surface of the water. The flower petals flowed along with the running water. New flower petals gently floated down from the osmanthus tree. It was a picturesque scene. Juan quietly walked out of the small wooden house. She saw Yang Fan lying on his back on a giant white marble stone that was shaped like a human. His head was resting on a stone pillow, and his eyes were slightly closed. He looked like he was enjoying it very much. She quickly tiptoed and carefully wanted to slip into the water. Although Yang Fan did not open his eyes, he seemed to know that she had already come out. As soon as Wanner took a step forward, he acted like an old man who had been drooling over his personal maid for a long time and had finally found a chance to steal a bite. He seemed to be lazily and somewhat lecherously said, "Wanner, come here." Chapter 460. Wanner stood still. She looked like a little girl who had been caught red-handed trying to steal candy. She pouted cutely. Yang Fan didn't even open his eyes. He just patted the smooth, jade-like armrest next to him in an ostentatious manner, splashing a few splashes. Wanner wrinkled her nose at him, but still obediently walked over. Anu's mind was sensitive and meticulous, so she appeared to be a bit tough and domineering. This was an instinctive reaction to protect herself, so she was the only woman who dared to resist Yang Fan's orders. As for Xiaoman, she was obedient to her brother Chou. However, the little girl was mischievous and cute, so it was normal for her to act like a spoiled child and throw a tantrum with Yang Fan. As for Wanner, she was born into a large family and had been taught since she was a child. She was definitely the model of a woman who regarded her husband as her god. Since she had decided that Yang Fan would be her husband, she would absolutely obey him. Even though she knew that Yang Fan was joking with her, and even if she refused, she wouldn't make Yang Fan angry. She still obediently walked over. Wanner climbed up the stone steps like a cat, her hand pressed down on the bottom of the bath towel to prevent it from being exposed. She had just carefully put one foot into the water when Yang Fan suddenly opened his eyes and laughed. He reached out his hand and pulled. Wanner fell into Yang Fan's arms with an ayah and splashed water everywhere. The fluffy blanket of flowers bounced outwards and quickly returned to cover her dainty body. Scoundrel! Following Wanner's coquettish grumble, the towel wrapped around her body was torn off by Yang Fan and thrown on the stone edge. The water on the towel gathered into a small stream and flowed away. The stream gurgled high and low, forming a small but extremely beautiful waterfall. This was the golden grain water. The golden grain water flowed out of Guizhong, east through the Golden Grain, and then into the Luo River. The Golden Grain Garden was on the path that the Golden Grain water had to pass through. The name of the Golden Grain Garden came from this water. This was a waterfall upstream of the Jingu River. There was an ox cart by the river. The ox cart was sturdy and light, and on the ox cart sat a tall and sturdy coachman. He wore a bamboo hat on his head and was looking around leisurely. Suddenly, he saw a donkey cart coming slowly from the opposite side of the road. He immediately jumped down from the cart and waited. The donkey cart was an ordinary village cart, and a scholar in a white robe was sitting on it. This person had long hair that draped over his shoulders, and he wore a wide-sleeved robe. He looked like an ancient Han Jin style, and his appearance was handsome. A black headband made his fair skin look as smooth as jade, and he looked like an immortal banished from heaven. However, the most conspicuous thing about him was his headband. It wasn't tied to his forehead, but covered his eyes. He was blindfolded and brought here on a donkey cart. The donkey cart stopped. The old man driving the cart turned around and said, "Zhang Fengyu, we have arrived." Upon hearing this, the elegant young man on the donkey cart removed the headband from his eyes and calmly tied it on his forehead. Only then did he get down from the cart. The man driving the ox cart quickly stepped forward and bowed, saying, "Lang Jun." The young man nodded and turned to look at the white-haired old man. Although this old man was old, his body was unusually tall and sturdy. Standing by the river, he looked like an old and vigorous pine tree. The old man smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "Zhang Fengyu, this old man will send you here. Because the whereabouts of my master cannot be disclosed, I have neglected Fengyu. Please forgive me." Fengyu was an official position, and this Zhang Fengyu was appointed as Shangqing Fengyu, Zhang Yiji. Zhang Yiji had always prided himself on his demeanor. But after seeing young Master Jiang today, his demeanor and temperament were immediately distinguished, and his arrogance immediately disappeared. Moreover, he was also a disciple of a large clan, and vaguely knew how powerful the forces behind young Master Jiang were. Therefore, he didn't dare to be arrogant in front of the old man who was young Master Jiang's confidant. Zhang Yiji smiled and returned the courtesy, saying, "Old man, you are too polite. I am very clear about young Master Jiang's difficulties in hiding. This time, I am already very honored to see young Master Jiang's honorable face, so a little trouble is nothing. Please tell young Master Jiang that when I go back, I will act according to what we discussed today. As for the outside of the palace, I will have to rely on young Master Jiang." Lu Boyan smiled and bowed. He watched as Zhang Yiji boarded the ox cart. His coachman whipped the strong bull and drove it away. Lu Boyan then sat on the donkey cart and turned back in the direction of Mount Mang. After walking for about a mile, Lu Boyan suddenly turned into the woods, and after a while his figure appeared again. When Lu Boyan reappeared, the car was gone. He was riding on the donkey, and Lu Boyan was riding on the donkey. He walked leisurely on the small road in the countryside, like a hermit in the mountains, in the fragrant and wild bathroom. The sound of running water could be heard from time to time. The water rippled, and the petals gathered and scattered like gauze, faintly revealing the two entangled bodies. Lang Jun hooked a pair of slender hands around Yang Fan's neck. With each powerful thrust of his, her soft eyes became more and more moist. She wanted to close her eyes and enjoy the feeling of ecstasy, but she kept staring at him without blinking, afraid that she would lose sight of him. She was more and more reluctant to leave him. Every time they met and parted, it made her miss him even more. Suddenly, Yang Fan's half-bent body straightened up from the water. His hands were under Wan-Er's plump buttocks, and he scooped up her wet body. Wan-Er cried out in surprise and quickly hooked her arms around his neck. The sound of hitting and slapping suddenly sounded like rain, followed by a high-pitched scream. The extreme pleasure made Wan-Er's slender neck suddenly tilt up, and her beautiful hair flew up, splashing water droplets all over the sky, shining like stars. Wan-Er trembled, and her slender fingers deeply dug into Yang Fan's strong back, which was like iron. Her two round legs tightly clamped Yang Fan's body, and the part that contained Yang Fan's body fiercely contracted as if it was squeezing juice. With the gentleness and tolerance unique to women, she soothed his pulse. The lingering feeling of ecstasy had not disappeared, and she suddenly slid down from Yang Fan's body as if the last of her strength had been suddenly sucked out. She was soft like a boneless snake. Yang Fan also lay down. Yang Fan lay on her body, and she lay on the smooth, white marble couch. The hot spring water was like the waves of the sea chasing after their shoulders. Yang Fan gently stroked her flushed face. After the soul and the flesh blended, Wan-Er's face had a kind of charming flush, and there was a kind of indescribable amorous feeling in her eyes and eyebrows. Yang Fan's caress made Wan Er's heart sweet. She couldn't help but raise her chin, and her seductive cherry lips asked for a kiss from her man. She was immediately satisfied, and she was kissed until she couldn't take it any more. She had to lightly hit her Longjuan's shoulder, waiting for him to let go of her, and then she could take big breaths. After a long time, both of them had a kind of feeling of satisfaction and relaxation. So they quietly lay in the water and didn't say anything. They only tightly hugged to express the joy in their hearts. After a long time, Wana let out a sigh and whispered in Yang Fan's ear, "I was so happy just now. I really want to be with Lang Jun like this for the rest of my life." Yang Fan suddenly frowned and said, "This? I'm afraid it won't be easy." Wan Er's face darkened, and she forced herself to be spirited. She softly said, "Wan Er understands. Wan Er just wants to. Of course, I won't make it difficult for Lang Jun to do something he can't do. But there will be a day when we can be together forever, right?" "Of course." Yang Fan kissed her cherry lips, and there was a touch of a gentle smile in his eyes. "I said, I'm afraid it won't be easy. I mean, it won't be easy to be together like this for the rest of our lives. We have to sleep and eat, right? How can it be? Bad guy." Wan Er revealed her white teeth and pretended to bite his chest. She angrily said, "You deliberately misunderstood me." Just as Wan Er said this, Yang Fan's stomach suddenly rumbled. Wan Er was startled and laughed. "It's only noon and you're already hungry." Yang Fan quickly complained, "I heard that my Wan Er was coming out and I was so happy. I went out early in the morning to wait for you. I didn't eat much at home, and just now, cough, cough, the activity was too intense." Wan blushed and quickly covered his mouth. She playfully hit him, and then suddenly giggled. "Okay, Lang Jun, you've worked hard. This afternoon, I will show you my cooking skills. Lang Jun, you haven't tasted my cooking yet." Yang Fan was surprised. Wan Er can cook. In his eyes, Wan Er was a talented woman. She had the air of a scholar, and naturally knew how to play the zither, calligraphy and painting. But did she know how to cook? He didn't know that the talented women of ancient times were not like Lin Dayu, who did not eat the food of the world. Needlework, cooking, singing, and dancing were all things that a girl from a noble family had to learn. Wan Er proudly said, "Lang Jun, don't look down on me. I know a lot of dishes. But today is autumn, so the food I have prepared are mostly dishes that are suitable for cooking in the wild. For example, roasted camel hump, sliced anchovies, steamed lamb, lamb's arm, bear's white meat." Yang Fan's mouth opened wider and wider, and he said in surprise, "You have prepared ingredients? How come I didn't know?" Wana said, "Men don't think about these things. Of course, women have to think about them. I have prepared these ingredients when we left the palace. They are packed in boxes and they are chilled." At this point, Wan Er suddenly covered her mouth and laughed, saying, "That's right, the steamed lamb is from Tongzhou. It is Lai Junchen's tribute to the emperor. Lai Junchen has wronged you. Today, it is not too much for us to eat one of his lamb." Tongzhou was later known as Dali in Shaanxi. The land was rich in grain, fertile in water, and fertile in grass. The quality of the whose sheep produced was tender and delicious. But what Yang Fan cared about was not the quality of the meat. Lai Junchen was now serving as a military officer in Tongzhou. The fact that he was offering a lamb from Tongzhou to the emperor immediately alerted Yang Fan. Shanghai Wana looked at his eyes and understood what he meant. She softly comforted him, saying, "Don't worry. Lai Junchen's actions are only to attract the emperor's attention, in case the emperor really forgets about him. But the supervisor in charge of receiving the tributes and the royal food in the palace are all my people now. The emperor will eat this lamb, but he won't know who is offering it." Yang Fan kissed her soft lips and smiled, saying, "You really are my good wife." Wan made a face at him and said, "Lang Jun, you are hungry." "I will go now." She struggled to get up, but when she moved, she felt her whole body go numb. She couldn't help but let out a cry and lay back down. Yang Fan smiled and said, "Let's rest a bit more. There is no hurry. I just ate a big meal from one. I need to savor it before I can eat something else." "You bad guy. You got what you deserve." Wan angrily opened her little white teeth and kissed his chest, leaving a bite mark. The bite mark was like the moon.